Assalamu alaikum, bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen, Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. All praise belongs to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and blessings and salutations on the noblest of prophets and messengers, our leader Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and on his family and on his companions. It is a distinct pleasure and privilege to be with you here today. Thank you so much to Sister Salma, who's an old friend and colleague, and on behalf of the BIS on Boston Islamic Seminary and the Wayland Masjid community. Thank you so much for having me here. I've been honored to visit this community before, and it's a pleasure to visit again. I'm going to get right into it. We have 3 hours allotted for this, and I think the way that we'll do it is in the middle, somewhere on the 90-minute mark, we'll take a stretch break. We'll let people freshen up, walk around. It's really important kind of to keep physically and mentally engaged, and inshallah we'll come back. And one of the things that I'll say right now is I have a lot of slides that I want to share with you, and all of my information is open source, meaning this is based on the research and experience that I've had to put this together. But when we get to the title slide, you'll see my email at the bottom of that, and you are more than welcome to take my contact info, and I can email you this presentation as well, because there's actually a lot of information on the slides, and it's a lot to sort of have to write down and memorize. So the idea there is that you can experience this, inshallah, engage with it, and then hopefully go home and then let it sort of cogitate and think about it, and then come back to it again and again and again. My teachers always taught me is that the knowledge of our deen that we've been blessed to inherit is meant for our community, and that people can take it and benefit from it, inshallah. And I have a lot of books up here that I'm going to get to in the later half of the presentation, and then even in the break, if you want to, you're welcome to come up and take a look at these books. These are my personal copies. I recommend all of these books, and I have 3 pages of recommended readings at the very end. That's why if you want the slideshow, you can have it, because then you have the references later on as well. So without further ado, I'll get into the topic. I see here that the next slide is the May 27th event. So do you want me to announce it? Would you like to announce it?
In case you didn't already see the flyers here or on the table outside, May 27th is our fundraising dinner. Please put in your calendars and join us at ISBCC, inshallah. If anyone wants to buy tickets, we are selling tickets at our table in the back. You can do so during my draft.
Inshallah. Thank you. I would say it's an honor for me to know both of these individuals, Ustadh Yasmin and Dr. Altaf, and I'm very inspired by the work of BIS, which I spent a lot of time with them a couple months ago, really hearing about their pedagogical philosophy and the plan, and it's incredibly exciting. And I encourage, you guys know this is your community, right? But I've been talking a lot about it to my community and in my travels, and so inshallah I hope to join you on the 27th for that event. So without further ado, today the topic is called Parenting with Love and Logic, and it's based on, alhamdulillah, I'm blessed to have 3 children. My children are ages 14, 8, and 4, and so there's quite a spread there from a teenager to sort of a primary schooler to someone in my youngest son, Luqman, is in pre-K, and so it's quite a range. And so a lot of this is based on research that I've done over a number of years and on experience. A lot of lessons learned the hard way, as they say, and I hope my children can forgive me for the mistakes that I've made, and can forgive me for the mistakes that I may make in the future. But I have an amazing partner, which is my wife, who is quite literally my better half, and we really see it as a partnership in terms of raising kids. And so I'm going to tell you a lot of stories, and Salma and my friends can attest to this, is that a lot of my teaching, both as a chaplain, as an imam, as a co-curricular educator, is based on a lot of experience I've had with my teachers and with my students. And so inshallah I'll try to bring in a lot of stories, because I think they really illustrate a lot of this. There's my email address right there. Feel free to write it down. Inshallah, I'm happy to share this with you. Now I wanted to begin with these 2 really important ayat from the Quran. You can read the references right there. This first one is from Surah Al-Isra. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Your Lord has decreed that you worship none but Him, and that you show kindness to your 2 parents. If either or both of them attain old age with you, do not even say uff to them, nor rebuke them, but speak to them with kindness and respect, and lower the wing of humility to them out of tenderness, and say, O Lord, have mercy on them, just as they cared for me when I was little." And the next ayah there, Allah Ta'ala is instructing us, O you who believe, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, save yourself and your family from the hellfire, which is an imperative instruction there, which is that ultimately for us, the reality is, we live in a moment now where everyone wants real talk, and I'll present to you the real talk that I have from my my teachers and that experience has taught me, and that I share with my community and my students as well, which is that for us, and I'm blessed to work at Yale. It is a distinct privilege, and I say that very self-consciously, in that to me, parenting is not about simply getting your kids to go to Yale and to get fancy degrees, and to have live in fancy houses and drive nice cars, and you'd have a pedigree, intellectual and family, the kind of they marry into and whatnot. Because Allah Ta'ala in these two ayahs, if you read them together, to start with the second ayah in Surah Tahrim, Allah Ta'ala is saying you have a responsibility if you're mu'mineen and mu'minat, believing men and believing women, is that save yourself first and foremost. That's your primary responsibility and obligation, and then save your family. That ultimately that's what it's about. That is just not for this dunya, and we want prosperity and felicity, we want happiness, and we want people to be successful in an emotional, physical, spiritual sense in this world. But ultimately for us, falah, success, broadly understood, is for the next world, is for the akhirah. Right? You may or may not have quote-unquote happiness or success in this life, but the ultimate success that's everlasting, and that's really the ultimate success, right? Meaning in that sense that that's what matters, is falah, is success and happiness, and I love the word felicity in English, is in the hereafter. And so I'm beginning with this, because to me, that is the maqsad, that is the goal. For children are a blessing from Allah, and they're an amana, they're a responsibility and a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for us to fulfill the trust as responsibly as we possibly can, and that when we stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment, to do the best job that we could have done, that we tried to do as parents, and then return them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then we beseech the rahmah of Allah, so that we have the Jannah, and then we have our loved ones, our family, our friends, everyone that meant something to us, is that for us it's not just about this dunya, but it's ultimately about the akhirah. And I know the crowd I'm speaking to gets this, but I want to sort of set the stage with that. And then look at the other ayah right there, Surah Al-Isra. Allah Ta'ala is saying, He's telling to every one of us has parents. We had parents, if your parents are deceased, but we've all had parents, right? Is that you worship none but Allah. Allah begins with taking His own claim there, and then He says what? That you show kindness. It's a decree. You show kindness to your two parents. And then Allah Ta'ala says, if you've been blessed to have your parents reach old age, do not even say uff to them. Right? And one of the things that I love commenting on, when the mufassirun, the scholars of Quran, when they comment on this ayah in particular, and the word uff is used in the Quran there. Now, in our time, in our language, in our idiom, that's like making even, let's just say, a non-verbal sort of a gesture, right? As in like the eye roll, or like psst, like that. Like if your parents say something to you, and to us, sadly, to some of us, this seems like such a minuscule, minute thing. Like we get into tiffs all the time with our friends, with our parents, and we blow people off, as they say. And I mean, what does it say that Allah Ta'ala is in Quran Majid, in His noble book, is saying, instructing us and warning us not to say even that much? Right? That's the maqam, that's the station that Allah has given to parents, and that we need to remind ourselves again and again and again in our relationship with them. Now, I'm so happy that there's children here, and young people, shall we say, some younger than others, okay? We should all think of ourselves as young, right? It's just a matter of what the scale is, it's relative. And I'm happy for that, for this reason, is that when my teachers would teach these subjects, they would speak at one level to the parents and at one level to the youth. And then they would reverse it. Then they would say certain things to the youth while the parents were listening, and then they would say certain things to the parents while the youth were listening. And I think there's a really powerful formula in that we're all in this together, right? Literally the nature of the relationship of a parent and a child is that you have to have there's to be partnership, right? There's two people at the very least in that. And so when I talk about parenting with love and logic, right, is that I hope by the end of our several hours together that you've seen the thread that I'm trying to weave throughout, is that, it goes both ways. Relationships are two-way streets. It's very unlikely in life that you find things at a one-way sort of unilateral sort of direction of a relationship, because a relationship means that there's something going on back and forth and a back and forth. Now, obviously, depending on the age of the children and the age of the parents, there are power differentials, and we acknowledge that, right? That at a younger age, the parents are the primary caregivers, the ones that are literally feeding and clothing and taking care of the physical, emotional needs of the child, right? But as life progresses and the children get older, the expectation for us, as we think of in sort of how we understand relationships in Islam and family systems is there's going to be a point where it tips, right? Where it switches the other way. That the quote unquote children are the ones that are making a lot of the primary decisions in the household, financial, physical, where they live, where their parents are, how they're going to be taken care of and whatnot. And so that whole, the roles are reversed in that sense, is that you're the one that has the vitality of, the prime of your life, of that middle age sort of portion, and that there's people that you now are responsible for once upon a time that took care of you. Does that make sense to everyone? That sort of cycle, right? That cycle of life. And this is by design. This is by the nizam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, before we go to the next thing, I want to really begin by framing this. There's a wonderful post that went around. I've seen it. You've probably seen it on social media. There's a very famous scholar. His name is Sheikh Salman al-Uda. He's a scholar in the Middle East, and this is attributed to him. I'm actually really blessed in that his son is a fellow studying at the Yale Law School this year, and I've had wonderful conversations about his father, and his father is a very interesting figure, mashallah, very learned man, very beloved in scholarly circles and public circles in the Middle East, and I encourage you to follow him. He's on Twitter, and he's on social media and whatnot, but this is a post that I want to read. It's a bit long, but this will help frame how I want to really think of these issues, and then inshallah we'll get into the next bit of slides. Is that okay? Okay, bismillah. So the post says, someone asked Sheikh Salman in a gathering, how do you get your kids to love salah? Well, I think it's a really reasonable and a very common question if you're a parent and you're trying to teach your kids prayer. How do I get my kids to love prayer? So it's not me saying, did you pray Maghrib when you got home from school, or did you pray when you woke up? It's that, how do I get them to intrinsically be motivated to want to do this, right? So this is what he said. The first thing he said was, have them love you. Learn this really critical life lesson. Tarbiyah is founded upon relationship. So tarbiyah, and I'll unpack some of this language. In Islam, they oftentimes, when we talk about Islamic pedagogy, Islamic teaching, there are two beautiful concepts that are put next to each other. One is called ta'lim, and the other is called tarbiyah. And ta'lim, for our purposes here, it's, the root in Arabic is ilm, right? Ta'lim is teaching or education. Let's use that for lack of a better term, a simple term. Education, when you teach your kids, right? So they go to school, they learn calculus, they learn reading comprehension, they learn social studies, they learn biology. This is a form of ta'lim for them, right? Now, for us, ta'lim is beyond that, right? Because you're learning about the Quran, you're learning about the hadith, you're learning about the seerah, you're learning about, what it takes to have a Muslim personality and Muslim character and all of that, right? Just being a holistic, well-rounded individual. All of that for us is the idea of ta'lim. You're teaching, right? It's in books, it's in halaqah, it's in dars, it's in lessons and whatnot. That's on one hand. And on the other hand, it's called tarbiyah. Tarbiyah comes from the root word, right? Murabbi is the one who teaches, who tends, right? A parent is oftentimes called a murabbi, one who has a young person under their charge and is tasked with the physical, emotional, spiritual, psychological well-being of this young person. And in some senses, if you look at it, I'll just say this now because in my mind, it helps me understand the idea of a murabbi is, some scholars have said that when you're a gardener, and you're planting a seed, it's work, right? You have to break the topsoil, you have to dig down, you have to plant the seed. Not only do you plant the seed, you cover it up, then you want to make sure the seed has access to sunlight and oxygen, and you're watering it, and you're making sure there aren't predators that are coming, that are attacking the seed, and then slowly, the little seed is going to germinate, right? And then it's going to break through the soil, and then you're going to have a little sapling, and then you have to still take care of it. You can't let it just sort of, as they say, you can't leave it to the elements. You have to tend to it. That's what a gardener does, right? They take care of that, and it's work, it's sweat, it's time, and then eventually, that little seed becomes a beautiful flower, or becomes a beautiful tree, or something like that. And these things take time to germinate and to really mature. But a murabbi is someone that dedicates that, puts in that time and effort so that when they can look at it and they can appreciate the beauty of the garden, of the tree, of the plant. I hope that makes sense to people, right? Now, tarbiyah is related in Arabic, right, to the idea of, for us, ta'lim is books and lessons and classes. Tarbiyah is the moral reformation, the character building, the personality formation and shaping that a parent or a teacher or a mentor does, right? Now, I should have mentioned, I started with this, but this is what Sheikh Salman is talking about. He says, have them love you, which is the question, answer to the question of how do they love salah. And then he says, learn this really critical life lesson. Tarbiyah, moral character building, is founded upon relationship building. Tarbiyah is the raising up and education of a child such that she or he can reach her full potential as a human being and as a Muslim. It's different than ta'lim, which refers to fact-based education. We oftentimes confuse the two, giving our children ta'lim when they really need tarbiyah. Ta'lim is teaching your children the how-to of the prayer, memorizing the du'as, learning the positions of the standing and the bowing and the prostrating. Tarbiyah is the cuddling after the prayer, when we ask each other, what did you ask for in your prayer, in your sajda? Ta'lim is memorizing the hadith and the ayahs of the Quran. The tarbiyah is the dinner table banter, where we talk about current events and other issues that are weighing on your mind and heart. Ta'lim is studying fiqh. Tarbiyah is the loving conversation we have about an incident that just happened at school. Ta'lim is studying the seerah, the prophetic biography, by memorizing the dates and the events and preparing for a quiz. Tarbiyah is snuggling in bed and telling stories of the brave men and women heroes of the past. And then he goes on, then the person who was narrating this, he says that the other teacher that was narrating this stressed this point a great deal, and it caused a seismic shift in his own approach to teaching his children. And he asked him if he had suggested program of study for school-age children. And he said that there is no expert on education, that he was no expert on education, and he would leave that answer to experienced teachers to develop such a program. But what he did was he ended with this, is that tarbiyah is an emotional, not a physical exercise. In the Quran, we're taught the dua for the parents, literally the ones that I just read. Oh Allah, have mercy on them as they had on me when I was little and they took care of me. So in other words, and this is the conclusion, have mercy on my parents because they did the tarbiyah for me when I was little. And so the takeaway with all of this is the theme of mercy. And so I want to narrate one really critical hadith. It's a well-known hadith. Imam Bukhari has a recension, a narration of it. Imam Muslim has the more famous narration of it, in which the Prophet ﷺ taught Sayyidah Aisha, our mother, Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha, he said, kindness, rifq is the word in Arabic. Kindness or gentleness is such a thing that when it's added to something, it automatically makes it beautiful. And when it's taken away from something, that thing becomes ugly. Right, I'm paraphrasing the hadith here. And so for me, the way all I can share with you based on my experience, my research, what I've seen and learned from my teachers, what I've experienced in my own life with my parents and my elders, is like the centrality of this hadith, is that we want to parent with love and logic, is that everything has to be done, through this prism or this frame of kindness, of how we deal with people. Why am I saying that? You're going to hear me say this again and again and again, but I'm privileged. I've been at Yale for 10 years. It's a privilege from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a responsibility from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has given me some of the brightest, most talented, most ambitious and hardworking young Muslim men and women, from across the world. And that I'm supposed to be their chaplain and their spiritual sort of mentor for that time that we're together in graduate school or undergraduate programs of study and whatnot. And what I've seen again and again from conversations late night over coffee or over frozen yogurt or like long walks, after Jummah, just walking back around campus, is that what our young people need more than anything today. And I travel and I go to high schools and give talks to, teenagers and whatnot, is we're living in such a cruel world. A world that is increasingly day by day by day becoming devoid of any source of kindness, right, or gentility. This is a harsh world. We live in a harsh world of absolute verbal violence. One of my teachers called it. The verbal violence that takes place on Twitter and on Facebook, on social media, people literally shredding people's reputations apart. Friends, or quote-unquote friends, attacking each other, going after each other, cyberbullying, just the whole list of things that's happening in the non-Muslim society, which is appalling and actually nauseating. And then what happens is that bleeds into our Muslim community as well, right? The politics and the arguments that take place between families and between communities, that take place in community centers and all of that. This, like our children, if we want, them to want to love Islam, to preserve their Muslim identity in this, in these lands, so that when they outlive us, right, and keep Islam alive and keep a Muslim character and identity alive, the idea there is, it's not rocket science. we can talk the talk, but it's really walking the walk. Like if they don't see their elders, their ammus and khalas, their uncles and aunts and brothers and sisters engaging with one another in a kind way that you can agree to disagree, and there's like an akhlaq, there's a character, right, underlying the way that you engage with the world. If all they're seeing is like anger and backbiting and gossiping and shady undercutting people's reputations and just like that hostility that takes place and permeates like schools and communities and the society at large, like, I mean, that in itself it's heartbreaking to witness that. I mean, in many ways, alhamdulillah, thumma alhamdulillah, I've been blessed to have some of the kindest people in my life, like my teachers, my elders, my aunts, uncles, my parents, and stuff like that, and my friends, right? That we all make mistakes, we all mess up. And it's like the gentility of someone when they deal with you in a kind way, that's what you remember, right? Now, there's a hadith that came to my mind, I'm going to share it with you, and then we're going to get into we're going to shift gears a little bit and get into some more meaty issues. We have to be real, in terms of what the challenges are. But it's a well-known story. Many imams use this in their khutbahs. The Prophet was in his masjid, in Masjid al-Nabawi, and he was having a halaqah, and the Sahaba were there. May Allah be pleased with all of them. And a Bedouin man came into the masjid. And I want you to imagine this, right? Alhamdulillah, I was just in Medina about a month ago. I go for Umrah. I'm blessed to take people from all across the country, students and families and whatnot, to go for Umrah every year. And so, I mean, to me, it just sort of hits home in a different way, that when you're sitting in the Masjid Nabawi and you're imagining like this taking place 1400 years ago, a man walks into the masjid, and quite literally, because we need to, this is in the hadith, the man begins to urinate in the corner of the masjid. And I want you to imagine this for a moment, like how obscene an act that is. Like if someone, God forbid, na'udhu billah, was to walk into like this masjid and to like walk into the corner and to start like, urinating, like we would be appalled, rightfully so, because this is the house of Allah. This is sacred space. And the Sahaba are like literally at that moment are ready to mobilize and to take this guy out. And the Prophet tells them to wait. Just wait. Don't react in that moment. Pause. And the man finishes, and then the Prophet calls him over. And the man saw he got a sense, shall we say, of the ruckus that he had initiated, right, that he had caused. And the Prophet sat him down, and he say, with such gentility, right, with such kindness, he said to him in very short but very powerful words that penetrated his heart. He said, this is the house of Allah. This is a place of ibadah, of worship of Allah. This is not a place like any other place that you go and you do these things. There's other places for that. And the end of the hadith is what? The Prophet, the man says, I have never in my life seen a better teacher neither before nor since than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like that one moment with that man's encounter with the Prophet ﷺ was like, indelibly like seared into this man's heart in the best of ways. Right? That the way that he did something so egregious, so horrible, but the Prophet ﷺ with this kindness, right, that only he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was able to model for us. This is our lessons for us, right? He's our ultimate teacher in that sense, is the power of kindness and what it does to change people's hearts. And so I'm going to relate it to, we're dealing with young people. I understand it's not easy, right? There's a whole set of issues. Now we're going to shift gears here. In all of my travels, doing this for 10 years, and I was a graduate student before that when I was studying myself, is that these are the major issues. And I just gave you a quick kind of summary of this. These are the major issues that our young Muslims, right? I mean, I can't speak to the global Muslim community, although I do travel a bit in my summers. Alhamdulillah, I've been to youth and met them in Pakistan and Turkey and Malaysia and these kinds of societies in the Muslim world. But let's just talk about the American Muslim community. These are the issues that people are struggling with. Very real. There's a thing called FYI, the Family Youth Institute, which has a team of Muslim social scientists and psychologists and psychiatrists, in fact, that do really extraordinary research. And they ask all the really hard questions that social scientists are supposed to ask. And you should check out their website. Just look up Family Youth Institute. I'm pulling the data from them, right? The numbers they have of Muslims that are sexually active, the ones that are experimenting with using substances, with drugs and alcohol. I mean, the numbers are astounding. We need to be, we're talking about being real, talking about being awake, right? This is the reality of, I mean, I assume the best of this community, that this community is, mashallah, such an extraordinary community with the spirit of this community and all of the programs that this community has, that this is not caught in, you know, in a lot of that data. But what I would say is that we just have to be aware of, this is a snapshot, right? That the substance issues that they're dealing with, that we're living in a hypersexual society of rapidly liberalizing norms. Right, that I can, for what it's worth, I'm 41 years old, I was in college literally 20 years ago, right, and that what passed for certain acceptable behaviors a generation ago when I was in college, and I'm someone who lives on a campus, that works day to day on a campus, is that the needle is shifted, right? I mean, the norms are shifting. The struggles of gender relations is that our young people sadly aren't, you know, they're not given good guidance on what are the parameters Islamically and culturally and, you know, within Muslim societies, and as we're, you know, in this multicultural society, on how we navigate gender relations. You know, then there's the ever looming issue of Islamophobia, right? I mean, that's like deserving of a lecture unto itself, right? That our young people are faced with. The amount of cyberbullying that goes on, the amount of physical bullying that takes place in schools, you know what I mean? Like, it's astounding. I was bullied, I got beat up when I was in school 25 years ago when I was in high school, and this is all pre-9/11 world. And so today, you know, they used to talk about millennials. When I say millennials, you people know, the community knows what that means, right? Millennials are, now they're talking about Generation Z, people that are really like today's 17, 18, 19-year-olds are designated by sociologists as a cohort as being Generation Z. And they're literally were born right before or right after 9/11. All they've known their entire life is living in a world that has cast a very long shadow, right? And you don't need me to stand here and tell you this. I'm sure you've heard all the stories. You read the same articles on social media that I do, that CARES statistics, the FBI statistics, all of these Muslims watchdog groups that are releasing this data on the amount of, like, you know, young women that are harassed, young men that are harassed. Not only, I mean, you can't even say it's in like one region of the country. It's like across the board, right? I know people in the quote-unquote South that are harassed, right, for being Muslim, that are being aggressed against. And I know people like in New York City, which is like arguably one of the most cosmopolitan, like metropolitan cities in the country, right? That people there, young Muslim men and women, are like getting straight out like harassed and attacked and things like that. And so that's what our kids are dealing with. You know, being a 14-year-old, 15-year-old is awkward in itself. And then on top of that, if you're brown, if you're a person of color, there's already that, because we talk now about dismantling and talking about white privilege and the way that operates, and people can get away with saying certain kinds of things. Okay. And then on top of that, you know, say you look markedly Muslim. You have a 15-year-old young woman that wears hijab, right? You have like a 15-year-old Muslim boy, you know, brown skin, wants to pray, sometimes wears a kufi at Jummah, you know, things like that, and like you're easily marked as a Muslim. That's what people are dealing with. And I forgot to mention this before. If anyone has a clarifying question, feel free to ask a clarifying question. I forgot to mention that. I will leave time for Q&A, but if you have something like about what I'm talking about right now, please, I want to make this interactive and engaging, so feel free to jump in. And the last one is identity crisis, right? I mean, that's in itself, like, there's courses that BIS is like, mashallah, you know, piloting on that. You know, this whole issue of culture and religion. How do we navigate this, right? We're blessed and privileged to be given the most extraordinary deen, which is Deen al-Islam, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a transcultural, transnational, trans-ethnic, you know, faith that ties us together. You know, from Manhattan to Morocco to Malaysia and everywhere in between and beyond. MashaAllah, you have such a beautiful diversity of Muslim races, ethnicities, languages, cultures, and all of that. But then how do you navigate this idea in America of like, what's the role of culture and what's its relationship with religion, right? And our scholars are talking about these things, but you know, to go to academic talks and, you know, big thinkers, big imams, men and women, sheikhs and sheikhas and professors that are talking about this is one thing, right? It's another thing when you're 12 years old and you're trying to figure out, how do I do this? How do I navigate this? You know, do I follow my parents' culture? Do I follow, you know, what kids at school are doing? You know, and then I'm already in such a diverse type of community and whatnot. Now, moving on.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
On the previous slide, where do you put teenager issues? where they are very rude, they don't listen to parents, teenagers. Where do you put them? They don't listen, become the best person now, they know more than their parents.
That is a wonderful question. I can't say I have the answers because I'm navigating some of this myself, right? But I think what it comes into, if I had to put it on that board, I mean, I'm happy to add it. It goes into, I think, the issues of identity crisis. And here's why. Social psychology, and I encourage people to take a class, now you can take these online classes from Coursera or something like that, in childhood developmental psychology. Part of what they have, the theories of childhood development, is that when you're 12, 13, 14, you're naturally, you're developing hormonally, right? Intellectually, you're developing, your body is changing, your mind is changing, and we would say your heart is changing as well at some level. You are trying to break away from your parents. Because up until that age, your parents did everything for you, right? They taught you how to brush your teeth, they fed you, they changed your clothes, and now you're like, no, I'm big, I have an independence, I need to assert that. What happens with that is, part of that is natural. There has to be a separation, right, at a psychological, physical level from the care of the parent. But I would argue the challenge, there's two complicating factors to that. My opinion and perspective on this is that we're living in a society that exacerbates that. We live in an increasingly rude society. There's no concept of civility anymore. We live in a society of shamelessness where people, and they're exposed to it, and we're all exposed to it. We're exposed to it every minute of the day, right? Through social media, through what we see in the mu'ashara, in the society around us, and our children are absorbing this. And therefore, what I would say is that the home really has to be your safe space. When I say that as a parent, right? As a parent, like, we need to make our home places of love and kindness, but also places of discipline and structure. Right? We're living in a society now, and I mean, this is a whole other topic. I'll probably come back to this. I don't want to get off topic right now, but we're living in a society of mediocrity, that there's no sense of pushing yourself to develop emotionally, mature, or intellectually have aspirations, or professionally have goals, right? Look at the role models of this society, and all of that, and our young people are exposed to this, and it's bleeding into the house. And so what I mean to say is that we need to be people, and I'll say this a little later, but for our purposes right now, one narrative is the glory of what made our ummah incredibly dynamic and vibrant and innovative and all of that is that we didn't aspire, we actually did aspire to things. We didn't aspire to mediocrity, if you get what I'm saying, right? Like, my ancestors from South Asia and my fellow brothers and sisters' ancestors from Central Asia and North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, they understood the legacy of Islam that they had inherited is to be cultural producers, to be scientists, to be pharmacists, and to be doctors and business people, and to do, benefit from all of the opportunities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given them, and to make something of the dunya to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now, you ask young people, the average young people, like, what do you want to do? Like, what are your goals in life? And it's really kind of sad. And I mean, part of it is that, like, our society is very confusing about these things, but all of that's to say, I didn't mean to get off on a tangent. Part of it is also this idea of culture and religion. So actually, this is a perfect segue to my next point. I'm going to answer your question, right? This idea of generation gaps. There's a continual source of frustration, of confusion and pain for every generation. We think that, this is just like today, we're going through it. But elders and youth don't understand one another because of different experiences, opinions, and behaviors, right? So tell me if you've heard this before. Like, you can just nod your head. People say, well, back home, or back in my age, we didn't talk to our parents like this. We didn't talk to our grandparents like this. Like, we didn't used to do it like that. And then, the young people are like, what are you talking about? Like, that makes no sense. That's just like how everyone does things now. And the older people are like, what's wrong with these people today? There's no respect. There's a lack of, decency and izzah and all of this. I mean, trust me, I've experienced that many, many times myself, and I've witnessed it many times. The secret is this. This has been happening through human history, right? This sense of, like, the young people don't understand the old people, and the old people don't understand the young people. This, one could argue, is just the nature of human life, right? The fact of the nature of human life, that Allah Ta'ala has designed it in this way. Part of it is there's a lack of communication between generations because of different perspectives, preferences, and expectations. Now, So you see that that line at the bottom? Elders assume that they know everything, and youth assume that elders don't know anything, right? So there's this sense, like, I mean, if you want to boil it down, you know, older people are like, look, I've got life experience. I've been around the block. You know, I've had X number of decades on this earth. Like, I really got this figured out. And young people are like, these old people, they don't know anything. What's their problem, man? They grew up like 40, 50, 60, however many years ago. The world has changed. The world has moved on. That, to me, is the crux of the problem. And you know the fascinating thing, just as an aside, because I do a lot of, you know, interfaith dialogue as well. So I was just at a Catholic Muslim dialogue program recently. And it's not unique to the Muslim community. That's what I'm saying, is that other communities have, this is like a human problem, right? That this sort of like fault line. And the idea there, you know, for us, amidst all this confusion and conflict, including self-righteousness, there are generalizations and this injustice, right? What I mean to say is this, is that these are patterns and cycles that we all fall into, and I'm not blaming anyone here. It is what it is, it happens. The thing is that how do we try to move away from those patterns, those negative cycles, right? And look, the nature of life, right? Look, in our deen, the nature of life is that you pray Fajr one day and the next day you may miss Fajr, right? Is that, you know, you do good and then you make mistakes, then you go back and you ask Allah for forgiveness. So what I mean is that this is for myself first and foremost, I want us to move out of this. It's like all or nothing. I'm either the most amazing parent in the entire universe and I have the mashallah child. The mashallah child is the one that's like such praying tahajjud, including their 5 times a day, and is memorizing Quran and is eating only halal all the time and never says anything bad or looks at anything bad. It's either that's the mashallah child, and they go to Harvard or Yale or something like that and are going to go on, you know, win some prizes and whatnot. Or then it's like, nothing is like, oh, my children are such failures, they're never going to live up to this, etc., etc. You know, we've created this, right? And look, I will tell you, I come from South Asian heritage, so I will speak only in my culture, okay, and not to indict any of the others of my, you know, people from my particular cultural heritage background. But this is ingrained, right? And it's ingrained to a level, and this is what I'll say, it's not even religious. Because if you have South Asian Hindu friends or neighbors and whatnot, they have the same concept. These are cultural, like, constructs almost, cultural scripts, right? The routes of respectability and izzah, and, you know, in our communities, you have to do X, Y, and Z. You know, you have to check off these boxes, right? To really be, you know, then people will say, wow, what a good family, right? Look how they're doing. They're doing well for themselves, and they're raising good kids and all of that. You know, for us, I understand that's the way human society works, but we've got to break out of that mold. You know, you do the best that you can. You pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You follow the guidance of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and of the people of knowledge to the best of your ability. You pray to Allah for tawfiq, and then you want to please only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not on what, you know, society is going to be saying and doing and whatnot. Now, moving on, related to that, the prophetic perspective on this generation gap. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ emphasized recognizing the generation gap. I mean, look at this, right? So this is to your point, sir, is that the Prophet ﷺ recognized that there's like, this is the nature of being a young person, right? That there's this tension and conflict. He emphasized recognizing it, and he said it has to be bridged. Now, one of the beautiful things, if you study our history, many of the early Sahaba that came on into Deen, right, that entered Deen in the early days were young people. Hazrat Ali ibn Talib radiallahu anhu is the classic, most beautiful paradigmatic example, right? The Prophet's brilliance was what? Of his many forms of brilliance. He maintained the perfect balance between respecting the wisdom and the experience of elders and simultaneously appreciating and highlighting the dynamism and the insights of the youth. That to me is like, when I talk about a magic formula, that's a magic formula. How does it work? We have to teach our young people that our deen is part of the teachings of our deen. There's a hadith on this, I think I quote just a little bit later, but I'll mention it now. The Prophet said, we're an ummah, we are a community that honors its elders, respects its elders, and is kind and merciful towards its youth. In that one hadith, the Prophet is bridging this gap by saying the young people need to understand and acknowledge, right? We say you got to give props to the experience of the elders. They have life experience. They're more learned. They have, the gray hair has taught them something, right? Of the ups and downs of life. And young people need to respect that, right? Even if it's not book learning, if they went to Harvard or Yale, if they didn't go to Harvard or Yale, and these young hotshots think they go to Harvard or Yale, is that these people know things about life and secrets to life that I have yet to learn. And then the flip side is what? The elders have to say, have to recognize and appreciate young people have a dynamism. They have this vibrancy, this energy, and they have an insight into the nature of the world that they're living through that we don't have. And that's just the way Allah Ta'ala argued, we can say that's the way Allah Ta'ala has created it, is that when you're 50, you're not, unless you're literally in that world of 20-year-olds every day, you don't understand the day-to-day pressures that 15-year-olds and 20-year-olds and 25-year-olds are going through. And when you have a healthy acknowledgement between the two, then you're going to, inshallah, have mutual respect, right? And that's what we're really aspiring for. So the example there is Musab ibn Omer radiallahu anhu going to Medina as a da'i. It's a beautiful story. In the interest of time, I'm going to tell you the story very briefly, right? It's a very powerful story, and I think in many ways, I tell this to my students a lot, because I think in many ways, arguably, it really speaks to the reality of many of the American Muslim youth. Musab ibn Omer was born in Mecca, and he was born into a very prestigious family. His mother was very wealthy, and he was born very handsome. He was born with a lot of money. It said, in young people's slang, he was essentially a baller. He was good looking. All the young women wanted to marry him. All the aunties wanted him as a son-in-law, right? He came from money. They said that he wore new clothes every single day, right? He was the best dressed young person in Mecca, and he had all of this. And then he hears about the da'wah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And essentially, for the purposes of our story, I'm going to just tell you this, is that he gives it all up. His mother is livid. His mother is incredibly angry at him. His mother threatens to cut him off. At one point, his mother even imprisons him in her house and forbids him from seeing the Prophet ﷺ. He eventually runs away. He escapes. His mother disowns him effectively, and he has no money. He's cut off from his family, protection and all of that. And that they said when the Sahaba used to see him, he was now miskeen. Right? He had just simple clothes like rags that he would basically cover himself in. And they said the Sahaba, when they would see him, when he would walk into the gathering, they would lower their heads and out of shame, in the sense of look at what this man had and that he gave up. In a sense of we say, in Urdu we say bichara, said, you really feel for this person, right? You feel a sense of pity for someone like that. And the Prophet ﷺ was very, had a real connection with Musab ibn Umair. Musab ibn Umair loved the Prophet ﷺ, and he would sit in his halaqas as a young person, essentially as a teenager. He would sit in his halaqas and he would learn, and he had at this point he's basically homeless. He's homeless, he's poor, he has nothing on the outside, building him up. But what he had was a beautiful heart. And the Prophet ﷺ recognized the brilliance, the emotional, spiritual brilliance of this man, right? And the value of him. Take away, delete all of the worldly value that we we attribute, right? And so what happens? For the purpose of our story, the Prophet ﷺ selects him to go to Medina Munawwara before the Prophet ﷺ made hijrah, and he goes and he prepares the city of Medina for the coming of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he goes there and he begins to give da'wah. And it said that within months of his being there, every house in Medina had heard of the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ and was anticipating eagerly the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ coming there. Now the last 2 points I want to tell you about this story. It said that when the Prophet ﷺ made the hijrah and he arrives in Medina, and all of the elders and the important people of Medina, the tribesmen, the chiefs, right, the economic movers and shakers, the political movers and shakers, so to speak, of that area, they came to greet the Prophet ﷺ. And it said that the Prophet ﷺ is sitting there, and he had 2 people next to him. The first, you can guess, was who? Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was was the sincerest, most beloved and trusted advisor to the Prophet ﷺ. They were the best of friends. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is sitting next to him, next to Rasulullah ﷺ. And who's sitting on the other side? No, is Musab ibn Umair radiallahu anhu. The Musab is now at this point a young man, right? We don't have an exact record of his life, but let's just say he was 20. A 20-year-old sitting next to Rasulullah ﷺ and sitting next to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is Shaykh. He's, an elder, beloved and respected amongst the tribes people. And why? Because whenever someone would come, the Prophet ﷺ would lean over to Musab ibn Omer, and Musab ibn Omer would tell him, this is Fulan ibn Fulan, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. He is the chief of this and this tribe. This is where he comes from. This is his position and status in the society. This is why he's an important person, right? And the Prophet ﷺ would like literally get his best information from Musab ibn Omer and would then, would greet them and welcome them and speak to them. I mean, for us, I want you to think about it in real terms. How many organizations are we a part of that have someone on the board that's like 20 years old? That is of competence, that is trustworthy, but that also that we have like empowered. We've given them a chance to say, you've got something to offer. You've got something to contribute. Like you have a really you're a value add, right? That's the word they use now in organizational leadership. Like you deserve a seat at the table. And then when we make shura, when we consult and we discuss the affairs of the organization or the community, is that this person is now, I don't even do organizational psych. There's people that do this, like executive leadership training. There's probably some experts in the room right now. But from where I sit, like this is extraordinary. Because what you've done is you've elevated this person. MashaAllah, because they're intelligent, they're insightful, they're dynamic, they're vibrant, and they bring a fresh perspective, right, to it, that say the 60-year-olds in the boardroom or that corporate office or whatever, that they're not thinking of, they're missing. And so look, I don't need Harvard Business Review, like manual on the top 10 best essays on empowering youth leadership to tell me that. We look to the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, to make it real, don't just relegate the youth to menial tasks. Ask for their input on important matters now I'm going to talk to the young people. Just because you're young doesn't mean you get an invitation. Like, you've got to earn it. And you've got to show that you're competent, you're smart, you're hardworking, you're trustworthy. People can I use a lot of sports analogies. I used to be an athlete. Like, if we pass you the ball, you're going to do something with the ball. Right? Now, I'm not saying this to stress young people out, right? To put unburdened stress on them, but if you have the mindset of I want to achieve something and I want to do it to please Allah first and foremost, and then show my community and my elders that I have something to contribute, inshallah, right? Then you'll get your chance, inshallah. Right? Youth are dynamic, motivated with analytical skills that can be tempered by the wisdom and lived experience of elders, and it gives you these powerful results. The avenues of respectability, two-way mutual respect based on decent behavior. Those worthy of respect were respected because morality was valued. Some people are easy to like and respect because of their character. With others, you need to dig deeper past the aggression and defensiveness and aloofness and apathy to get buried treasure that enriches. So to your earlier question is that, yes, I see this perhaps all too often. Young people that are rude and, they don't show their elders the proper respect. And trust me, it can be very grating. It can be very disheartening. But I think is that if we kind of stick through it with them, right? And you kind of don't give up on them, right? And you show that I'm looking past this misbehavior and this lack of adab right now, but there's really you have something to offer, right? And then the whole way that if you imagine the murabbi, the parent, the gardener is there with the seed, right? And it takes work. You've got to really put in the time, right? Youth often seem at odds with elders, and every era has its own challenges. Youth think elders don't understand them, quote unquote, and the youth criticize the present state, but they eventually mature and realize the wisdom and experience of elders. I can't tell you how many times, and you probably see this if you work, if you've been in a community for a long time, you see someone when they're 15 and you come back 10 years later and they're 25, and they're just very different people. Inshallah, they're very different people, right? And part of it is that we do the long game, right? We're really investing in the vitality and energy of what's to come back. I can only tell you my own life. I look back at the way I was when I was 15, and I'm horrified. The things that I put my parents through, and the things that the way may Allah forgive us all and hide our sins. They're like the naughty behavior I had in Sunday school, goofing around and not paying attention and all that, and not wanting to be a part of the community and whatnot. Then you go through life, you grow up, you go through college, you go to the next phase of your life from your teenage years to your 20s, right? And you're still maturing, right? But then you look back, from your 20s, late 20s into your 30s, you're just astaghfirullah, Allah forgive me. Really, you should go back to for the young people, or if who are somewhere in that time frame, you go back to your teachers and your parents and your ammus and your khalas, and you just ask forgiveness from them. And you say, I'm really sorry, I was a knucklehead. You know, I said these things, I did those things, I didn't mean it. You know, and part of that is just like, they're still maturing. You know, there's a book called The Teenage Brain. I really recommend it. Unfortunately, I forgot, I didn't bring it. But you can look it up. I mean, it's easy. You can find it on Amazon, called The Teenage Brain. There's this, the author is a neuropsychologist, and essentially, and NPR did a huge review of it. Essentially, it's this, that the latest neuroscience research shows that the prefrontal cortex, which is where we make our decision making, right? This is where you decide, like, I'm going to go do something crazy or I'm not going to do something crazy, and everywhere in between. That this actually keeps developing physiologically until the age of 25. And so now they look at young people, you know, teenagers and college students, and they actually have a very different way of assessing risk than like older, more mature people do. It's because their brain, the prefrontal cortex level, hasn't fully developed yet, right? Neurochemically and physiologically. So they make bad decisions. And so what that means is that like knowledge is power, right? Is if we know this as parents and teachers, and we tell young people like, look, you're going to make mistakes. I'm not justifying those mistakes, but mistakes are going to happen. And that there's a little bit, you cut people a little more slack. What it also goes to young people is to say that when you think you really know and have things figured out, you really don't. Like at an emotional level, there's still maturing going on, and at a physical level, and a psychological level, you're still growing up, right? So that 18-year-old that's giving you lip, or that 22-year-old that's giving you attitude about, I've got all the problems of the world figured out, why can't you get with it with the times, old man? Like, you can just kind of rest assured and say, Bichara, poor kid, he doesn't understand that he doesn't understand, right? So we'll give him a little time, you know, we'll give him a little bit of slack and whatnot. But anyway, I just wanted to spend a minute talking about that. Now, modeling good behavior and creating a positive atmosphere. You know, researchers say that parents are the first line of comfort and the last line of defense. Parents must love, nurture, and empower the youth as best as possible. This goes back to the hadith that I quoted in the beginning, right? Which is the Prophet instructed Sayyida Aisha radiallahu anha that kindness is something so powerful, so beautiful, that when you add it to something, it beautifies it. And when you take it away from something, it becomes harsh, right? And the opposite of beauty, it becomes ugly, right? Be fair and just. Give them true love, because many kids are deprived of adults with emotional depth and expressiveness. And this goes back to the point that I was talking about earlier. You know, I mean, one is up for debate, you know, whether the world is more cruel today than it was once upon a time, right? A generation or two or more ago. But all I can tell you is in the present. The world is incredibly harsh and cruel. Whether you talk about race, you talk about religion, you talk about gender, you talk about class, at every level you want to cut it, unless you're from a certain privileged class, the world is going to be incredibly inhospitable at times, right? And our young people are exposed to this day in and day out. They're exposed to it physically, like when they ride the bus to school or take the T, or they walk around campus, or they're like at a Starbucks, and you know, we all read what goes on, right, day after day. Our young people are reading this, they're seeing this. This is viral content that they're like exposed to again and again. If they're in a good school and good teachers, their classmates and teachers are talking about this, about all the injustices that they see, right? All the chauvinism, all the violence, the verbal, the physical violence, the emotional abuse that takes place. Like, you know, you imagine like when you were at that age, like how tender your heart is. You know, like the smallest things can just become so magnified. Good and bad, like this, you know, that expression of love or compassion and tenderness that someone shows you, it's like amazing, right, when you're 18. But then also that, like, that aggression, that violence, that marginalization, that disrespect, that also is exacerbated and amplified. We're like, you know, when you're older, you have a thick skin, and you're like, whatever, that's just the way the world is, that's just the way people are. But you can't say that to an 18-year-old. Because they're experiencing it, like that's their reality, that's what they're going through, right? And so what I say is, if nothing else that you remember, I'll tell the story about my son a little later after the break. Maybe that'll be a funny story that you can remember. But besides that, if nothing else that you remember from today's talk, just remember that if, you know, let's just say the first step that we can take towards being better parents, to parent with love and logic, is just to be kind, right? Just to be kind to our young people. I mean, inshallah, that itself will move the needle and will work wonders. Because look, I know how it is. Like I grew up, yes, you had a question?
Just wanted to ask if you have any advice for dealing with children who are difficult to love.
Or or difficult to love, like in terms of their behaviors and whatnot?
Very strong-willed children and different than dealing with strangers, because a stranger you don't really have any baggage, but with a child.
Sure.
The world has been that way all along. It's like baggage, and you get caught in a negative cycle.
No, that's very true. That's very true. That's a great question. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I would definitely encourage. I have some readings at the end that I'll share with you, and that now, mashallah, there's a lot that's been there's a lot that exists, by family therapists. I'm sorry, and that I mean, if you get to an issue where it's kind of pathological behavior, that we have Muslim family therapists and counselors now that one might need to go to, because we all get into these negative patterns of behavior and scripts, right? Some of them can become quite severe, where everyone plays a role, right? Like a family member, a sibling, a parent, and whatnot. And if it gets to that level, like I'm a huge advocate of getting therapy and counseling between couples, between parents and children when it's needed. I've seen, that's not my expertise, and that's why I want to say I don't want to give you bad advice, but the best advice I can give you is to seek out. And for example, this is just literally the one that pops into my head right now. There's a thing called the Khalil Center in Chicago. They're based in Chicago. The person that runs it, his name is Dr. Human, and he's a fantastic scholar. He's actually a traditionally trained Islamic scholar, and he has a PhD in psychology. And he runs this thing called the Khalil Center. And it's the first of its kind. I've never seen as fully developed and integrated a counseling center that brings together sort of what we'd call like Western, therapeutic models with Islamic psychological principles, spiritual principles, right? And they've really kind of done this great synthesization of it. So they have their headquarters in Chicago. KhalilCenter.org is their website. They've opened up an office in San Francisco, and I believe, inshallah, forthcoming, they're opening up a center around New York City as well. And so my point being is that they have like referral lists, right, that you can like look upon for if one needs it. But really briefly, generally, to answer your question, I would say is, look, there's things that kids are not going to listen to from their parents. That's just part of the nature of like these relationships as well. Sometimes it helps if you have a relative, right, an ammu or khala or someone like that comes in, or maybe an older cousin or sibling or something like that can help kind of mediate at times. But yeah, when they're difficult to love, I mean, that's sadly, I appreciate your honesty. That's part of the reality of what happens sometimes, and is that, remind ourselves this child is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that, think about it, right? So in the Quran Sharif, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells so many beautiful and powerful stories of the Qisas al-Anbiya, the stories of the prophets, right? So look at the story of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam. His own son didn't believe. And Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam is pleading with him, right? And so, I mean, there's a lot of tafsir that's written on that, and I'm not qualified to go into that, but what I can simply say is we oftentimes can feel bad that I'm a failure as a parent because my kids are not doing X, Y, and Z, right? And that there's a reason, there's a wisdom behind Allah Ta'ala telling us in the Quran that even one of my greatest prophets, right, had a really unruly and spiteful and disobedient child, right? That literally ran into danger and away from his father and away from the guidance from Hidayah. And so the idea there is it's not meant to break us, to just say that these are struggles that different people go through. Do your best to remind yourself this is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and inshallah things do, and it sounds kind of trite, but I mean, I think they say cliches have there's a nugget of wisdom in cliches, right? Is that if you kind of can stick it out, that things do get better, that inshallah that they, unless there's a deeper emotional or pathological, psychological issue, that they'll eventually inshallah grow out of that, and you can turn the corner, so to speak. Does that help? Okay, I'm sorry. If you need to talk, maybe we can talk at the break if you want to talk about specifics. But I hope that helps, inshallah, at least a little bit generally. Now, on this notion of modeling good behavior and a positive atmosphere, right? Give them true love, because many kids are deprived of adults with emotional depth and expressiveness. And again, I just want to mention one thing, and I'm going to go on to the next hadith there, is, we don't think of this a lot. I mean, I can say as a parent, I need to remind myself this more and more. Kids are absolute sponges. Right? I mean that in a good way. They're observing everything you say and do. And they, in fact, they learn more from observing you and your behavior than they do of listening to your words. That's just a fact of life. You can give them all of the like lectures and all of the talks that you want about X, Y, and Z, about do this or don't do that, etc. But at the end of the day, kids are going to pick up the most from observing your behavior. They see the way you act. They see the way you act with your community. They see the way you act in private. They see the way you act in public. They see the way you act with non-Muslims versus the Muslim community, the way you act with your parents and your elders and your friends, and with, you know, with all kinds of things. And that's what kids are constantly absorbing at a young age, right? I'm not a developmental psychologist, but I read, you know, some studies that say, like, at a young age, kids begin to mimic patterns of behavior from their parents, right? That's how they learn. That's like literally how they learn to do things in the world. And so we think that gets switched off, like, oh, they're learning to talk and mimic my talk and walk and eat and figure out how to motor skills. No, this is like emotionally they're mimicking and absorbing what they're seeing their parents, right? And look, that's tough, because if you're a parent and you're like, I have to be on all the time, and like, we're human beings, right? We have highs and lows. We have good days and bad days, and we have days that we're like super nice and super sweet, and you know, the muhabba is there, the love is there, the mawadda is there, and there's other days where you're just like, you're in a rut, and it's just, you're angry, you're stressed, you're frustrated, you're short-tempered. And so like, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Like, that's part of being human, right? We can have anxieties and frustrations, but the idea is to remind ourselves that in front of our children is that we have emotional depth with them, and that we talk about our feelings. Because look, we a lot of times come from communities, and we're in a society that's completely, not, I don't say emotionless, because we have like the worst kinds of emotions on social media. They're not like developed emotions. They're like superficial, narcissistic emotions, right? And so what happens is, in the world, what they're watching in television, what they're reading on social media, and what they're seeing with their friends or mimicking like from what they see in movies, like, that's horrible. That's like, the vast majority of that is like garbage. So what they need from us is to have real emotional depth, right? That we talk about how our own feelings, good and bad, right? You know what I mean? Like, to tell kids that like you love them is, all I can say is this, with all due respect to the billions of South Asians in the world, South Asian parents don't tell their kids they love them very much. I mean, I'll just kind of put that out there. It's just not part of our culture, right? And I'm not saying that to knock anyone, because I'm from that system, and I hope I don't replicate like the negative parts of that cultural system. But like, to tell kids that like, you know, I love you, I support you, I'm here for you, or like, I'm frustrated and angry and scared as well, right? And talk through at an appropriate level with your kids. Like, what would that do to like a 12-year-old to be like, you know, obviously kids think their parents are like superheroes at one level. You know, my parents have no problems. They're going to save us. They're going to take care of us and all that. And you want your kids, they need to, like, at some level, emotionally, psychologically, they need to believe that and, you know, feel reassured by that. But as they get older, to have depth and to say, you know, we're struggling. I don't know, we're struggling financially, paying the bills. So-and-so, you know, is sick, like your grandfather's sick, and we need to make decisions, and these are really hard decisions about end-of-life care and palliative medicine, and there's a lot of doctors in our communities. Like, these are serious conversations, you know. A lot of times, just by the nature of it, you know, in college, people have, you know, at that age typically, that's the first time they largely have dealt with the tragedy of a death. Right, like a grandparent will become sick when they're in college, and then they have to rush home, right? And they're processing these new emotions of mortality and loss, right? And bereavement and grief and whatnot. And I mean, these are very powerful, like life-altering kinds of conversations, in that, like, obviously you're going through it yourself, but to, you know, to bring kids into that, to help them make sense of it, you know, at some level, we're not all therapists, right? And these are complicated conversations, but as a parent to have that conversation with a child, I think is really important. But to get back on the main topic here, you know, the Prophet said there's no better gift a parent can give his child than good manners. This is the hadith that I was talking about before. A young man never honors an old man because of his age, and you can put in young man or young woman here, right? You can interpolate that. Never honors an old man or an old person because of his or her age, except that Allah sends someone to honor him or her when he reaches that age, right? And this is like, we need to ingrain this into these are civilizational codes of understanding that, like, the Prophet ﷺ taught us. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're Muslim in Malaysia or Muslim in Mongolia or Muslim in Mali or Muslim in, like, you know, Manhattan. Like, these are things that, like, are across Muslim cultures and across Muslim time and space and civilizations, right? These teachings of the Prophet. One of my teachers calls them civilizational codes. And I'm going to be very honest. I'm trying to be honest with you throughout this whole conversation, but I want to punctuate this point especially. You know, I cannot imagine what it is like to run an Islamic school or to be an Islamic teacher, right? It is, I can only say I expect it's really hard. I mean, really hard is an understatement. I have friends who are my age, who are now, mashallah, like quote-unquote professionals in the middle, their mid-age, in their 40s, that teach at and are administrators at a lot of Islamic schools. Weekend schools, full-time Islamic schools, and whatnot. And then, look, this is a much deeper conversation along the way, right? And there's a lot like academically, quote-unquote secular academics versus religious academics and all of that. And you can parse and debate and just, you know, all of that. But my point that I want to make was this. From a lot of my friends that are teachers in these schools, you know one of the biggest complaints that they get? It's not about the kids not trying in class and not caring about calculus. It's behavioral problems. They're just really, it's not that they can't understand calc and, you know, biochemistry or whatever it is. We have smart kids, mashallah, in our community. It's the behavioral issues that they're like, I'm a trained teacher with like a graduate degree, and I'm cleaning up the mess of the 16-year-olds in my classroom because their parents weren't doing the tarbiyah at home, right? Now, it's not all on the parents, because some kids just, they need extra help and whatnot. But if we don't think, remember when I started with ta'aleem versus tarbiyah? If we think that I'm going to give my kids all these books, read about Islam, learn about praying, learn about history, memorize these dates and facts and figures, and you're going to be a good Muslim. I've got a sad, harsh reality for you. That's not how you make a good Muslim, right? The ta'aleem part has a role, but the tarbiyah part of really forming their heart, right, is if you don't do that in your house, let me tell you something. You know what's getting done? This is where they're finding it. They're getting it on Snapchat. They're getting it on their whatever closed groups. This is where, like, if you're not talking to your children, or better yet, if you're not listening to your children and listening to what their concerns are, and as a murabbi, as a parent, if you're not having in-depth conversations to mold that heart and that understanding, and I'm not going to say this is going to happen overnight. This takes time. You know, as they say in English, it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And frustration. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or whatever it is. Maybe it's 2 steps back and 1 step forward. It's hard, but if you and I are not doing that tarbiyah at home and forming their heart to love Allah and love His Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and learn the prophetic akhlaq and character, right? This is a sewer. I would love to imagine that our young Muslims are out there listening to all of the great sheikhs on YouTube and on Twitter and on, you know, in Snapchat or whatever. That, I mean, I can't honestly with a straight face tell you that's like reality. There are a lot of great sheikhs on Twitter. I follow many of them, alhamdulillah, and subscribe to their YouTube channels, right? But that's not what a lot of people are using this for. And I'm not saying this to dog on technology. I mean, it's just a matter of the world is giving them things to think about and ways to feel and is modeling it for them. And if we're not modeling it and teaching it in a positive atmosphere at home, then they're getting it elsewhere. And maybe they're not even doing this. Maybe you're really good about, you know, the no cell phone policy at home and whatnot. They're getting it from their peers. Right? The kids that they hang out with, they go out to ice cream with, that they ride the bus with, that they're walking around in the park with, they're getting it because those people have their own issues that they're working through, and your children are being affected by that. And so this whole thing of like, my friend, I literally just talked to him. I mean, I don't want to give away what school he's at, right? But he's at a very prestigious, very well-known Islamic high school, and then he was just like, I have like degrees in education, and I'm sitting there cleaning up behavioral problems from these teenagers, day in and day out, without even getting to the content of like what I want to teach them, right? Because the parents are neglecting this. I'm saying this as a parent myself. I understand life is tough. You've got bills to pay, you've got responsibilities, you've got all these obligations, all these stresses on your time. But I guess the bottom line is if you don't do it, who else is going to parent your kids? I mean, going back to the children are amana from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? He's going to ask us, what did we do with it? How did we take care of it? Like, I'm not saying it's easy, you know, most of parenting, you know, they say parenting is the toughest job you ever love. Like, most of it is actually, you're underappreciated, you're overworked, you're stressed, right? You're neglected, you know, you're emotionally burnt out, physically burnt out as well. You're investing all of this, and right, when they talk about ROI, return on investment, you're thinking, when is my ROI? When is my return on investment? When am I going to see the fruit of my labors? Allahu alam. I hope it's sooner rather than later, inshallah, for you. But, you know, rest assured, Allah Ta'ala sees everything and is aware of every feeling that you go through. One of my friends, I'll just share this. He's a well-known scholar. He said, I was in a conversation with him, and he has, mashallah, young kids of his own, and he's very experienced. He's traveled the world and whatnot, and he said, we think being a wali means what? A friend of Allah. A wali is like a great person. You think of the Sahaba or awliya, right? These are friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says we think of a wali, you have a mental image of a wali or waliya, like a man or woman that's a close, devoted servant of Allah. And that's beautiful, mashallah, to have that image. He says, anybody can be a wali. And we always say this, right? He goes, you want to know one of the secrets of how to be a wali? Is that everything that you do every single day, you're just doing it for Allah. And yes, I love the idea of going to the Ramadan fundraiser and dropping, big check with multiple zeros at the end of it, to be a great Muslim, or making Hajj and Umrah, and praying long Qiyamul Layls in the night and fasting, all the time. That's great. I'm not astaghfirullah. I'm not saying diminish any of that. Those are wonderful things that inshallah will get you on the fast track to wilayah. But you know what he also said? It's the stuff that you don't think about. Doing your laundry for your family, making breakfast every morning for them, scrubbing changing the bed sheets, like all the stuff that no one ever sees or gives you, we say in Urdu, shabash. No one ever gives you a shabash, like the pat on the back, like you're doing a great job as a mom or a dad or as a parent. All the stuff that nobody ever sees, you have to remind yourself Allah Ta'ala sees all of that. And if you're there making the waffles and then they're screaming kids at 6:30 in the morning before they get on the bus that the waffles are too burnt or aren't warm enough, and you put the wrong snack in the lunchbox, or you were late to pick them up from soccer practice and it's like you wasted my time, and just know that all of that you're doing and you're putting up with, inshaAllah, this is part of your path to wilayah. Because you're just reminding yourself, this is all for Allah. I'm doing it for Allah, right? That Allah Ta'ala, you're doing the best that you can to take care of what He's given and trusted you with. And then He says, this is how quote unquote, and I put it in quotes, normal people can become beloved to Allah, right? Like the vast majority of us are not scholars or rich people that are donating millions of dollars or doing fasting every other day or, praying all night. I'm not saying that to knock us, that's not what most people do. But this is what can get us, inshallah, on that path. Anyway, so look at what the Prophet says next. He says, the best of you is the one who is best to his own family, and I am the best of you towards my family. The point being, I think it's a beautiful segue, and we're going to take a break in just a moment, is that do the best that you can, right? And look, most people will never see this. They will not see you doing your best to be super mom or super dad, right? I mean, when you go to the masjid in Ramadan for the iftar and everyone dresses up and acts nicely in the masjid, yeah, inshallah they'll see that. But I'm saying the day to day, if you put in the energy to just take care of your family, like in the ways that I talked about, and you already know this because you're doing it, mashallah. Just keep doing it and just keep rectifying your intentions. Our teachers teach us that. We think that we think that we all learn about the importance of intention, right? You make the intention before. But our scholars say the secret to purifying your intentions is you do it 3 times. Once in the beginning, before you do something. Second is in the middle of the action. You just sort of recalibrate or reaffirm the intention. And at the end of an action, you just, it's kind of your heart gets that sense of sakina, that sense of tranquility, that I did this for the sake of Allah, right? I sat there and did 3 loads of laundry this weekend because Allah wants me to take care of my family. I want my children to live in a clean place. And you're there on your load number 2, drying it, washing it, fabrics off, and all of that. And then you're done, and you have these mounds of clothes that you're you're folding, and you're just like, this is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah Ta'ala has given me all of this. He's given me children. He's given me, and on and on the script that you have in your head and in your heart. And so if you think about those ways, inshallah, this will keep our intentions, really kind of robust throughout. Now, I'm doing a time check. I think we're doing well on time, but we'll take a break. I've been speaking for about well over an hour, so we'll take, let's say, 5-minute break. Inshallah, people can get up and stretch, and then inshallah we'll come back in 5 minutes, okay? Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. So welcome back. Jazakallah khair for attending, and we're going to get right into it, continue where we left off. The next section of this I thought was really important, kind of given it's so ubiquitous, it's such a part of our lives, both professional and personal, morality and spirituality in the age of technology. And so I'm going to to move pretty quickly through this because I've touched on some of these things. And again, I don't want to have to read every single slide, but you're more than welcome to, I'm happy to email this to you if you'd like afterward, because then the third section of this, because this was kind of my midpoint mark. We have 90 minutes left for this session. And then I do want to leave time at the end for conversation. I have some book recommendations I want to get to as well. So I'll move a little bit quickly through this, but it should all seem very sort of like self-explanatory at times. Social media is a tool. The pros are that it connects people in groups, and that another pro is that it gives us updates about the world, right? If you're on Twitter, if you're on Facebook or whatever, you get news aggregators, right? That you can follow about real-time unfolding events as they're happening, and that's very powerful, right? It's very different than like traditional media structures of like newspapers and magazines, or even now newspapers and magazines all have digital formats. They all have their websites and whatnot, but Twitter and other, Twitter in particular, but Facebook also, you'll get events as they're happening in real time, and that's very powerful to connect you. The cons are that, very frankly, that these are very distracting. That it's a huge time suck, that one can spend half hour on Facebook and not even realize that like you just keep scrolling through your news feed again and again and again, or on Twitter, and you're just like, where'd all this time go, right? And it can be a huge distraction, because when you're trying to focus and you're trying to do work on your studies and whatnot, this can just be like, oh, I'll just check my Facebook for a little bit, and then it just, next thing you know, like you've totally lost your train of thought. It's very hard to get back in the into the momentum. Then you have a false sense of connections and friendships, right? Like we may say, I have 1,000 friends on Facebook, or I have 1,000 people that follow me on Instagram or whatever, but you have to ask yourself, are these really your friends? And might I posit or argue that they're not really your friends. Like, these are people that maybe you have a social acquaintanceship with. They're in your community, they're at your school, they're kind of at your workplace. But traditionally we have think of the concentric circle model, right? There's people in the middle of your concentric circle, at the core of your circle, I should say, that are your family, your siblings, your really, really close friends, right? Maybe at another level. And then after that are like your classmates, people that you see on a day-to-day basis. And then there's kind of like your community members that you see once in a while, et cetera, and it keeps radiating outward. And the point is, you understand, you don't share everything in your life, or you don't share really precious, intimate details of your life with everyone. Like, there's certain people that a normal human being would share with their parents, their spouse, their siblings, or then maybe their close other loved ones, friends and whatnot onward. But the problem now is, it's kind of really interesting, shall we say, on what people share with online, right? They share some really intimate details, or just even the banal kind of parts of their life, and they just think like, oh, this is what people do. And that poses a much deeper kind of question, right? Which isn't just like a Muslim question. I think a lot of people are working on this. There was a very famous scholar, I think she was from MIT, named Shelley Turkle, who wrote a book called Alone Together. And this book is like several years old now. And then she talks about this idea of false connections that we have, where we think like, oh, all these people care about my life and they follow me, and I want to talk about what I had for dinner last night, and where I'm going on for vacation, and my thoughts on the election, or my thoughts on, whatever is going on, deep issues of structural racism and inequality, to like whatever. We just overshare as a society now. And not everything that you have, every thought that you have should be or needs to be shared with the world, and not everyone should be like probing into what those avenues of other people's lives. Like there's like deeper conditions, right, that this comes out of. So at one level, Imam Zayd Chakra has called this, challenge of social media. It's very spiritually murky territory. And I'll give you a very quick example to move from the abstract to the concrete. You know how much gossip takes place like on Facebook and Twitter, right? Like that's what I call verbal violence. Like people attacking people. It's one thing to discuss ideas if you want to debate ideas or issues or whatnot. It's another thing to go after people and say this person isn't on my manhaj, they're not following my group, or they're part of this political party or ideological movement or whatever, and they're not, and so all of this, which should be a tool, becomes a gateway into a lot of murky territory. And what it happens is that they have consequences, right? People's reputations, get ruined. There's issues of libel, of slander. Like, I'm not even talking legally speaking. Our deen, the beauty of our deen is that we actually have, for lack of a better term, like these things, there's guidance and there's structures and to legislate how we do this. Like, not to destroy people's reputations, not to spread false rumors, not to carry tales. It's called namima, it's called, ghiba. Like our Sharia has terminology for this, and this sets up a whole dangerous, world that a lot of young people who are, not even young people, a lot of us older people are sort of guilty of. But what happens with young people in particular is this is what they're seeing, right? I'm not saying we can ever roll back the clock. I don't think that's possible. You're never going to Facebook was invented like 10 years ago, right? You're never going back to like a pre-Facebook world. You can opt out and you can not be a part of that, but understand that whatever percentage, 80, 90% of the rest of your society, I don't know what the data is, but something like that, that's where they're living and where they're getting their information. So what we need to do is we need to become responsible, right, on how we use this kind of technology. And there's a whole realm, it's called digital literacy, right? I mean, my son goes to a school now, alhamdulillah, where they bring in experts, they bring in sociologists that talk about digital literacy and like what's happening, because there's a lot of cyberbullying that goes on, right? There's a lot of people that are access to really false information and misinformation on here. I'm not even going to talk in here, we're in the house of Allah, we're in the masjid, but all of the stuff you've been reading about fake news and the collusion of this government with that government and false news stories and analytics companies like mining your data and giving you access, like this is a fitna of the world we live in right now. We can't think like, oh, it's just really bad articles, I don't want my kids looking at bad things. That's true, I don't want my kids looking at bad things on the internet either, right? But it's far beyond that as well. Like this has real world implications. The problem there is most people, very frankly, are not critical consumers of information. The average member of our society is not very well read, is not asking intelligent questions upon their sources of information, is not able to think through a logical fallacy, like I read something and it seems so bizarre, and maybe it's a conspiracy theory, like let me actually go read actual sources to figure out this stuff. People aren't doing that. And I'm not even saying it's this is the government here, blah, blah, blah. Even in the Muslim community, we have all sorts of nonsense that takes place on here, on different groups attacking other groups and spreading all sorts of false information and attacking people's reputations. So what I'm saying is our children don't know any better. Like this is all they're being exposed to, right? And so we have to learn digital literacy ourselves, right? And then model it, right? Because if you get one of the themes, the takeaway themes of my whole presentation is like, we need to learn to model good behavior, right? Like you have to teach your kids how to use this stuff. So the critical questions, what things are distracting us from Allah, our faith, our community? In a seemingly hyper-connected world, how do we maintain spiritual ethics and a connection with Allah? I know people that they call them keyboard warriors, right? They'll sit there all day long and argue about, you name it, Kashmir, Syria, Philistine, Gaza, Yemen, Myanmar. That's awesome. Like, okay, you're learning, you're trying to go online and debate, but like, if you don't know what you're talking about, what are you debating, right? And then not only on top of that, what is all of that impassioned arguing and debating? When is the last time you honestly changed anyone's mind on Facebook? Like, I need you to ask yourself that question. When's the last time that you spent an hour or two going on like a 50-message thread back and forth on some person's post who may not even really be your friend, they're just some random acquaintance, and then you felt so passionate about, I have to defend this point. Like, well, I don't know what's your win-loss ratio. I have to guess it's probably not that great. Unless you're like some super brilliant like debater or something like that. Because this is not how you convince people. This is not how you change people's hearts and minds. And so the question there is this making you closer to the Muslim community? Or dare I say, there's people that honestly get pushed away from this. Now, I don't mean to, look, there are people that are like, I grew up in a very small Muslim community, quite remote. Right, and that was before all of this. I don't doubt that there's some Muslim, and I'm just going to make up a random place, like living in Nebraska, and they're just like, look, I don't have a masjid, or I don't have a masjid close to me, or a community that has a critical mass of young people that I feel connected to, and I go here and I watch YouTube videos, and I like to talk to people and chat. Like, okay, that's what I said. It was one of the pros. It connects people. But you have to understand the limitations of this, right? And now, are you really building a sense of community? Yeah, you're learning things, and maybe your mind is being opened and expanded. But if you're not accessing the right information, right, it's actually very detrimental and harmful to you. And so, is it making you further away? Because I know people, all they do is they just complain on Facebook constantly. I'm not even complaining about, yes, we should all be incensed and really upset at the structural racism and the violence that takes place with drone strikes to the water shortage to and everything across the board, right? That's what this can do, is this can inflame those passions, but it can also educate you about those things. What I'm saying is people now, they're hating their community. I'm just being very honest. All they read on Facebook and social media is my community sucks, and the Muslims are so bad, and Muslims are so backward, and Muslims are like this, and Muslims are like that. I'm not papering over real issues and grievances that people have, but there's a time and a place and a way that one airs those grievances and actually begins to redress them and fix problems. Right? That's what a community builder does. The problem, look, a hammer can build you a beautiful building, or a hammer can tear it down. It's a tool. It's a value neutral tool. And there's too many people that they're just putting out all this nonsense and garbage, right, about calling people out all the time and destroying any bonds of community. Whereas, try saying that to someone's face. Try saying that, having a relationship. People in your community, I'm all fine, the police brutality, by all means, talk about police brutality, talk about all these issues of structural racism and violence in our society that our government at all these different levels are doing. But to me, the line gets crossed when there's just about destroying any sense of community cohesion or ethics. And I'm not saying communities are perfect, but you can take one of two routes in life. You can either be a part of a solution, or you can be a part of a problem. That's what one of my teachers told me early on. If you want to be part of a solution, you want to think about, how do I solve problems? If you want to be a part of the problem, it means you're not solving the problem, you're actually only making the problem worse. Right? In an attempt of no, I'm just telling the truth, and I'm just exposing things, etc., etc. There's a time and a place, and for most people, you have to understand the nuance of that line. But anyway, I want to reiterate, I'm not saying that technology is inherently bad. Yes, sir?
Yeah, my question is, this is a very good question for the youth. The main problem, this is the distraction.
Yeah.
Between culture and religion.
Yes.
And we are all brought up our homes, our
yes.
country, different from here.
Yeah.
How do we answer this question for them?
Well, I mean, mashallah, there's some young people here. I think what we need to do is, I hope that if I'm talking to the parents can go home and have this conversation with their children and the youth. And then I think we need to have more of these for the youth as well, right? And so I do this with my community. I'm blessed. I'm a chaplain in a university. I talk about this in my halaqas and whatnot. But we need to do more of this, because I see so many people who have so much passion and energy, but the energy and passion is not directed in the right way, right? And then and this opens up another can of worms. But I appreciate your question. Thank you. Reflect on today's technology's challenges today. It's a mass destruction and mass distraction, right? Technology stimulates your mind and distracts. Thus, it destroys focus and attention because we're bombarded with all these stimuli, right? How do we attain peace and tranquility with stimulation? The question is, how can you concentrate in the absence of stimulation? I'm going to give you a really quick question to think about yourself. This is a rhetorical question. How is your prayer? What's the quality of your salah, of your namaz, right? Can you focus in it? Because what people have argued is that now, with this, when you're scrolling through your newsfeed and you need constant dopamine stimulation, right? That's what they're showing, right? Every time you get a like, there's a dopamine little blip that goes off in your head, right? Now, look, Tarawih is coming up. How many people can stand for an hour, listen to the Quran without thinking of when the Imam takes a break, I'm going to check, what's going on Facebook, what's going on my email, right? And that's just so the idea there is that, look, it's not easy to concentrate in the prayer, but for us, it's a spiritual exercise, spiritual discipline, so that you get a khushu, right? This is aspirational, that I get to a sense of khushu in my prayer, in my reading the Quran, in my fasting having a meaning, and whatnot. And so this isn't helping with that, right? So this affects three areas of our lives: spiritual and religious lives, intimacy, and social interactions. And I'm going to go through this quickly, just in the interest of time. Technology becomes a master of our lives and harms our soul, right? And again, I'm not anti-technology. It's that, I'll give you a really quick example. we're habituated to stimuli, so the deen becomes difficult. The khutbahs, the halaqas, the prayer, the zikr, we're like, people want these 3-minute videos that they watch. If people know what I'm talking about, young people, like they've done studies on this, that like the ideal video is like 3 minutes or less or something strange like that. Because after that, people's attention span is whatever. Like the videos that pop up, in your news feed, for people that are on, they're like all of a certain length. And then they're like, well, I can't listen to a khutbah for half an hour. It's so boring. Why would I go to the masjid to listen to the sheikh or sheikha give a halaqah or a dars, for an hour? I can't do that. I'll go read like 140 characters or whatever, you know what I mean? If I want that even. To sit down in the prayer or to make dhikr. Because these have real world effects. Like people don't think about this. Is that if you constantly need to be stimulated all the time, then when you're not getting that stimulation, you're just going to be like, I'm bored out of my mind. I don't understand. Why can't I focus? Why can't I do this? People, they're not relevant. They're not interesting, etc., etc. Worship, the idea of worship is that it produces sakina, which is antithetical to incessant stimulation. When you have sakina, it's a sense of tranquility, to the point. I'm just going to use one random example. In the salah, when you go from ruku to, when you go from your qiyam to your ruku, down to your sajda, to each one of the positions, the scholars have written in the books, right, from the fiqh that we've derived from the Quran and the hadith of how we pray, that you have to pause for a moment between each one of these things. That when you get up between 2 sajdas, you get up, you stop. In some of the books they say it's almost like you let your bones settle, and then you go down for the next sajda. Now my question to you and to myself first and foremost is, how do you pray? Is even between, I'm just using one example, between the 2 sajdas, I lead the prayers in my university, so I'm with my students, I'm with the community on a regular basis. And look, I know the eyes should always be on myself first and foremost, but I also teach the fiqh of prayer, right? And then you see people, the way they don't even come up all the way. It's just like, it's sajda, halfway, and then back down. Part of it is laziness. Part of it is people are in a rush. I've got to get to class, or I've got to do this, or I've got to that. I have something else, that's on my, that my schedule is so tight. And part of it is that people just, we don't physically operate in a way anymore that we can be still, right? There's a sense of like constant agitation, and that's what I mean is that these things have effects. And our deen, mashallah, is so deep that it helps us sort of diagnose these issues. Then there's anti-authoritarianism in deen that's crept in. This Sheikh Google, right? This idea of people are like, why would I need to ask a real scholar, a male or female scholar, about such and such a problem? I have access to Google. I can just look it up. And I mean, once you open that, in English, right, in literature, it's called, that's Alice in Wonderland, when you go down the rabbit's hole. Once you go into like Google and you start asking questions for complex, questions and problems, you don't know what kind of stuff you're going to find. There are good, legitimate scholarly resources, and then there's a lot of other stuff out there, right? And so now young people, some of them have this attitude of like, well, I just looked it up, and of course, there's a fatwa that allows this, or there's a so-and-so, like, why, of course, can't we allow this and that? Whereas if you sat down, I mean, our deen is what? Our deen isn't just books, right? I mean, I invite you to look at any of the lives of the great men and women of the past. They went and they sat with a teacher and they read the book. And that was part of the ta'aleem. But what was just as important as the ta'aleem was the tarbiyah. And they would sit there and they would take from the hal, from the spiritual, emotional, physical state of the teacher, and then that would have an effect on them. The famous story they say about Imam Malik, rahmatullahi alayhi? Imam Malik, when he was a young boy, his mother asked him, his father, I guess Imam Malik's father had said that his father left when he divorced his mother when he was young. And Imam Malik's mother said, what do you want to be when you grow up? When he was young. And he said, I want to be a singer. And she was like horrified, right? It's like, what? So she said, you should go to the masjid and sit in the masjid, in the halaqah of the masjid. And he was a young boy. And they said that she would put on a jubbah, put on a thobe, and would tie the imamah on his head, right, and send him to the masjid. He's a young boy. What is he going to learn by sitting in the dars, in the lesson of the teacher, of the sheikh, of the ustadh? And she said, just go and take from his hilm before you take from his ilm. Take from his character, his akhlaq, his patience and forbearance before you take from his knowledge. And now we have Imam Malik rahimahullah, one of the greatest scholars of this ummah has ever seen, right? And I mean, there's so much his story brings tears to your eyes when you read it. But like, his mother knew that he needed to have good exposure to good people, right? To be in the presence of people so that you're sitting there and you're benefiting from them even when they don't speak. They say Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahmatullahi alayhi, his majlis had, I mean, there's different numbers on it. Some people say his majlis had thousands of people, his halaqah, right? Only a few hundred of the people in his halaqah out of thousands were actually his students. They would sit in the front, and the rest of the masjid was other people, common people like you and I. They would go, not because they understood all of the really deep lessons of fiqh and tafsir and hadith and usul that Imam Ahmad is talking about. They went just to look and benefit from the suhbah of the shaykh, of the imam, right? Because that's when you pick up from things. Do you know the Sahaba, the ones that were scholars, were few in number, that were like, we would say like ulama. And we know their names, the famous ones. May Allah be pleased with all of them. But there were tens of thousands of Sahaba. And these are all Ahl al-Jannah, all people of paradise. Why? Because they had the suhbah of the Prophet ﷺ. They didn't go and sit in the halaqah day and night like, Abu Hurairah did, or Sayyidina Omer and Sayyidina Abu Bakr every morning and every evening they would have a halaqah with the Prophet ﷺ, right? These are people. They had jobs, they had families, they had wives, they had husbands, they had kids and all of that. But they saw the Prophet ﷺ, and just by being in his suhbah, his mubarak, his blessed companionship, that would have an effect on them, right? That's what I mean, this is what is sadly disappearing amongst our young people today. Right? Going to the masjid for 30 minutes for a khutbah. I'm being very honest with you. You're not going to learn Islam in 30 minutes a week at the khutbah. The khutbah is not even meant to, like some scholars say, the khutbah is not even meant to be ta'aleem. It's not even meant to teach you, right? The details of fiqh and history and hadith and Quran. The khutbah is supposed to be what? Enjoin the good and forbid the evil. Tell people about inspire them to do good things and motivate people and encourage them to avoid the munkar, the haram things. That's what the khutbah does, right? It motivates people. It's the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It refreshes people's hearts. That's not teaching you about Islam. To teach people, you need to be with people, right? So what I would say, the last thing, and again, I mean, so I'm saying is, not anti-technology. You can use this. There's good content that's accessible. But if you really want to make an impact on your children, remember in the first part we talked about parents, and parents model good behavior and set a precedence, household. I'm going to shift gears here and talk about the idea there. Some of my teachers come from families of teachers, like the father is a teacher, and then the grandfather was a sheikh and imam, and the grandmother was this, and on and on and on. But the students didn't always have ijazah from their parents. Because, parent-child relationships have their own dynamics. So they say, go learn from so-and-so else. You have to go somewhere else to be in because the way, this as a parent. There's things that you'll say day and night to your kids and they won't listen. And then if someone else says it, they're like, oh, this is such a good point. MashaAllah, kya baat hai. So smart. Right? This is the nature of how Allah Ta'ala has created the parent-child relationship at some level, we would say, right? And it is what it is, right? So this is why some of the greatest people, they said Imam Ahmad, in Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal's time, his mother sent him to someone else called, it was called the adib, right? The muaddib, the person you learn adab from. He wasn't even a scholar. It was just someone that had good adab. They had good manners and akhlaq. And you sent your kids there, like we say after school. They would go there, they would sit there, they would drink chai and, watch them just in the house and how they lived. Because what happened, that transmission, right, is from heart to heart. It's not from books. You don't learn adab from books. You don't learn etiquette and manners from books. You can read about it, but that's not how you learn it. You learn it from being with people. And I'll tell you one of the secrets for what it's worth, because I want to move on. I want to respect your time. We have about 1 hour left, but I went off on a tangent, but I hope it's a useful tangent, right? Because I want to you can read all these notes later. I want to get to the khulasa, to the summary of it. If your grandparent, if your parents, meaning your children's grandparents, are still alive, you should really, I'll tell you right now personally, I'm being very honest with you, I'm very honest with my students and my community, is my father sent my brother and I back to Pakistan when I was 15 years old, and I spent a whole summer visiting my grandparents. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. I went, we say gaon, we went to the village, and I just spent time in the village, in the city, my grandfather, Allah yarhamu, and grandmother, Allah yarhamah, very pious people. He would knock on my door, 5 in the morning, we're going to the masjid, we're going for Fajr. After Fajr, we'd come home, he said, sit down, read your Quran. And then after that, he would have breakfast, and then people would come to visit him, and he would say, go, your grandmother's going to make the tea. And then she would go make the tea, and I would come in and serve it and sit there. And, and I was, like I told you before, I was another opinionated, rude 15-year-old, like many of them are. But, just the experience of like having to live in a different environment, so to speak, but just like hearing them tell their stories about their life and seeing who they were and what they went through, like that had an impression on me when I was like, it got me off my Nintendo. It got me away out of all the other stuff that I was doing back home, right? And that was like, honestly, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, like that, and then many more years after that, right, that Allah Ta'ala opened doors for me, that I visited my relatives, and that I visited what would become my mashayikh, my teachers, right, that my parents would say, go, 2 months, you need to go sit with people, knowledgeable, pious people. They don't have to be scholars even, but they're righteous salihin, salihat, they're righteous people, and you go to them and be in their sohbah, right? And then, a lot of what they're saying is what your parents are saying as well, right? What you're saying, but the difference is it's coming from a different angle, a different avenue, right? And the effect that it has, and you see them, and you see the way they walk, and they talk, and they live, and they eat, and they drink, and the way they interact with their people that are their age, and the way they act with other people in the community. And then, that leaves an impression on people. So Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, when he was little, his mother would send him, this is even before they're before they're doing alif ba ta, memorizing the Quran and all of that, it said. Just at a young age that you get exposure to good people. Now, what is that a plug for? The plug for that is, in your own life, if you are blessed to have relatives, right, that are still alive, send your young people there. Have a heart-to-heart conversation with them and say, I have friends, they go back to Jordan or they go back to Egypt for the summer, and then now, they're my age. So when their parents did it when they were young, and they're like, that was such an amazing time in my life, right? That they gave me this chance, right, to do this. Or the other plug is that we need to develop more robust youth programs in our communities, right? Because a lot of times a really dynamic youth coordinator, youth director, that's who's going to connect with our young people, right? And is going to make this lasting impression, inshallah, and to change, recalibrate, and listen to them, and then also give back to them, inshallah. So this is, these are just things to keep in mind, mashallah. Now, moving on, this is, you can read about it, the challenges now that we have with intimacy issues because of the fitna that our eyes and hearts are exposed to online. These are serious problems, right, that are going on. The issues of social interactions jeopardized because we've lost adab. What I just talked about, comportment and etiquette. I'll give you an example, right? Is I want you to keep this in, just do a social experiment, right? As they say, like social observation. The next time if you go out to eat, look at, if there's a table of 4 people, just look at the way the people are behaving. And what I've seen in my experience and observation is, you go out to eat, and I also live on a college campus, so I'm eating in the dining hall every day, so I'm exposed to this at a higher frequency. But a lot of times you have 4 people and they're all on their phone. They're not having a conversation. And you're just you paid money to come out and order food, to hang out with your friends, and you're all looking down at and half the time you're communicating via text, right? You're not even talking to each other. Ajib, this is very strange, right? Just imagine just the bizarreness of that. I could be working, I could be sleeping, I could be doing any number of things, but I'm here with these people that I call my friends. And instead of talking to them, instead of listening to them or them listening to me and us talking and having verbal and nonverbal communication, I'm looking down at my phone, right? Ajib, it's very strange, right, what goes on. And then people will be talking, and so look at another level. People will be talking, and then they're if they have it on a vibrate or whatever, they'll get the thing will ping. They get a WhatsApp or a text message or something, they'll be they won't even say excuse me, they'll just look down at their phone, right? That's kind of rude normally if you're talking to someone and all of a sudden I was well, I'm not too interested in this anymore, I'm going to go over here. It's just rude. People didn't used to do that. But what we've done is, and look, we're all guilty of it, I don't mean to call anyone out. The thing is that we've habituated ourselves to this to such an extent that we need to relearn some of these adab, right? If you're expecting an important call or a text, you say, pardon me, give me 2 minutes, I'll be right back, I just have to attend to this, as opposed to it being presumed that this is how I'm going to talk to everyone, is that you engage with everyone, you're talking to me, and that I come away from this. Being disconnected from family because of friends, right? The idea there is that, you have your family, you have your siblings, if you live close to your relatives or whatnot, these people are not in your life, but you know what's going on in everyone else's life, right? Your friends, you're up in their business all the time. The dangers of narcissism. They say that Instagram is the worst app when it comes to, they've done studies on this now, right? The Guardian published a big one a few years ago, that of all the apps, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all of them, Instagram is the worst when it comes to promoting narcissism, because people take all these selfies and they curate these public images, and they're constantly worried about how many likes they get and what it is. And there's like pathologies behind this stuff. And we need to talk, this is digital literacy, right? We have to teach our kids this stuff. Half of our deen is about human interactions. That's what my teachers would always teach us. We think deen is like praying, fasting, reading Quran, memorization. It is. That's a significant part of it. But half of our deen is about mu'amalat, about dealing with people, right? Mu'asharat, like how you interact with people. And people don't, I'll give you another example. And I don't want to keep, I'm just saying this so that we can be honest with each other. This is what my experience has shown me. I'm privileged to work and travel at really prestigious institutions. And I see really smart, really talented young people. People that are going to go on and like work for like big tech and, be change agents and thought leaders and all of that, right? Go on to med school and law school and MBAs and, the whole 9 yards. But what strikes me is that however good they look on paper, some of these people don't know how to interact with adults. They don't know how to like actually talk to another adult. Like they can talk to their peers because their peers are like them and they have their own coded language and mores and norms. But when it comes to talking to like a professor or a teacher or an administrator or just another normal person in the community, they're awkward. Like I understand part of being young is there's a social awkwardness, but they don't know how to have a conversation. Like I've literally been around brilliant people that have like 4.0 GPAs that are like being, recruited by like big companies. And then you sit down and they can't talk to you for more than like 2 minutes. It's very strange. I don't know. I don't remember like being that in my time. People always have rosy tinted glasses, as they say, when they look back at their own time. But I think something's different. Because, my wife, she's commented on, and other people that I know of my age, they comment on this, like today's young people, they don't know how to have look, people will turn it on. There's no doubt. When you're in the interview room, they know how to get dressed up. They know, they've done their homework. They've read all of it. They want to interview at McKinsey. They've read all the points on McKinsey. They know how to have a conversation for that 30 minutes with the interviewer. But if it was just a normal conversation about normal things that people talk about, they shut down really fast. And to me, I'm not saying you need to have long, in-depth conversations with every single person you meet on the street, right? But is that, our deen teaches us the importance of mu'asharat, of social living, and mu'amalat, dealings with one another. And if that's missing, then that's really kind of strange, right? Suggestions: educate yourself about the effects of technology and have honest conversations. Don't ignore issues. A lot of this has been written by, mashallah, non-Muslim scholars as well, and I encourage you, take advantage of all the resources that are out there. You have psychologists, you have therapists, you have sociologists that are writing on this, about what this is doing to our society, and that's a lot of what I read. It's not even coming from Muslim sources per se, is that technology is having effects on human communication and human interaction and our social living, and we can't ignore issues like find a moderate and balanced way to navigate modern life with these tools. Integration is not, and not assimilation. It's like, look, I'll tell you an example, just to make it very practical. Effectively, the vast majority of us have this, right? And we use it. And many of us are guilty as parents and as workers that we bring our, now your boss can reach you and email you and you have access 24/7, right? And then we bring this to the dinner table and we have this on. And it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy. But you need to come up with ground rules for your household and say, the credit to this goes to my wife. May Allah preserve her and protect her. My wife is like the enforcer in our house, mashallah, because I'm weak and I like mess up on this too much. It's like when we're at dinner, we're going to have a family dinner, there's no tech at the table. Doesn't matter, someone's texting you, you're pinging, your emails are coming in. For that time for dinner, it's put away. It's time for salah, time for reading Quran, time for doing your homework. Like that has to be put away as much as possible, especially when it comes to, okay, homework, you need your laptop, you need to be reading emails and whatnot for students. But there's parents that you can disable certain apps on your phone. What's really fascinating, what I have to find about really motivated students? mashallah. There's people, like I was so impressed. There was one young man that was studying at Yale. Now he's mashallah in medical school. He's about to graduate from medical school. He came to Yale, and this is a really nice guy, mashallah. You know, family was Jordanian American. You know, every semester he would just say, Chaplain Bajwa, I want to have lunch with you. And mashallah, he would come out, we'd have lunch, just talk about life. He knew how to have a conversation, you know, about big things, about little things, big ideas, small day-to-day stuff. I was so impressed. I was like, this came from a family of 6 kids, mashallah. But the reason of the many things that impressed him about me, right? I mean, he won major awards when he graduated, he went to Yale Medical School, mashallah. But that's not what impressed me. What impressed me was one thing, just a random conversation we had, right? We were talking and he said, we were talking about technology and apps and social media. He says, you know, I have and you can look this up, I don't even remember what it's called, this was years ago. There's a way to essentially lock your computer, your laptop. It locks you out of certain programs and apps. And you set it up and it's on a timer. So it says for the next 7 days, for the next week, I literally cannot access my Facebook, I cannot access my WhatsApp, whatever. And you know what? Subhanallah, he knew himself so well. He knew how that would distract him, take away from when he's studying or writing his paper or doing his work, that it's like you go in and you set a password and you lock it and you can't undo it. And there's different versions of this now. But I was like, you know, this, when we talk about like commitment to excellence and success, you have to know yourself and you have to know like what, we all have like weak points. And to say like, I'm going to get, and this wasn't from his mama or his baba. That's what impressed me even more, right? It wasn't his dad saying, you better make sure you study for your orgo exam, because if you don't, your med school application is all riding on your orgo exam or whatnot. It was just that he is like disciplined enough to be able to do this. And mashallah, you can use any number of examples, but that's what I mean, is to know that like it's a tool and we have to understand how the tool operates, and we have to be the parent. The parent is the one that says you're not sleeping in your room at night with your cell phone. The cell phone is going to go out, you know, where all the cell phones are getting charged overnight in the living room, in a public place. So you don't have the cell phone in the bedroom at night for any variety of reasons that we could go into, right? Or if you have a laptop, the laptop gets closed at a certain time. If you have homework, you know, fine, you have your paper, you're up till 10:30 if you're in high school, whatever, I don't know what, you're writing your paper, but when you're done with that paper, you are responsible. You're going to pick up the laptop, you're going to put it in the bedroom, or you're going to put it in the living room, and then you're going to go to sleep, right? I mean, for us, this has spiritual as well as like, you know, academic benefits. Right? This is what my teachers, like what I learned from them, is that that's the role of the parent, is setting up these boundaries, setting up these rules of tech usage and of the household and whatnot. And on top of that, I would say that, you know, we also, you know, you need to have honest conversations with your parents, right? Parents have to have honest conversations with their kids. Is that you say like, look, there's your phone. If you have a teenager and they have a high schooler and they have a phone, now everyone, you know, it's expected, essentially, just kind of the world we live in now, that, you know, they're going to have access to a phone because they're an iPad, they use it in school for work and all that kind of stuff. And you say to them, I have full access to this. This is, like, I bought you this. I can go through your history at any time. And yes, I know kids know how to hack that and know the ways around it and that kind of stuff. But it has to be communicated to them, is that like, I can take this anytime, and if need be, we're going to have a frank conversation on tech usage. And you know, we have to set boundaries to the best of our abilities. I don't have all the answers. Like, I'm just saying what I've read out there amongst the research of like people that are successful users of tech, regardless of their religion. Right? That these are like strategies that they have. And for us, there's more at stake, right? Because we understand this. Islam calls us to be people of greatness, not couch potatoes or distracted consumers. Be engaged and productive in society, which is that like, okay, fine, you know, I'm not telling you not to have a social media presence, like, you know, this day, I mean, mashallah, look, you all know this, right? One of the biggest, I have a huge family, alhamdulillah, my family spread all over the world, alhamdulillah. And you know, Facebook, I'm on Facebook with my ammus and my khalas and my cousins and this and that. And you stay in touch with people's lives, where in the old days, like you had to make a call at Eid time and ask like, how's it going? Or, you know, on your birthday or something like that. Now you can, and that's, alhamdulillah, that's a benefit, right? And so the idea there is that we have it, we use it, but you know, not to get sucked into this, right? Maybe it's because I'm just seeing, you know, and like people, like everywhere they go, everyone's taking a picture of everything. when did this like disease start, right? You know, like you have to take a picture of everything. I need to capture the moment. Bhai, like just be present, man. Just be in the moment, capture it in your heart, right? That's what Sheikh Hamza said. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf said, you know, if you look at he said of his teachers, he said, you know, now all these people, they're going, and look, I understand the moment you're standing in front of, you know, famous masjid, famous place, and you're like, I got to get a picture of this and take a picture of me standing over here, you know, in this like sacred place. And he says, you know, in the old days, they took pictures with their hearts, of their teachers, of the places they went to, instead of like, I need to put it on Instagram and have a picture for this when I, you know, show my friends when I go home. I understand the impulse, but we just need to be people that think more deeply about that, right? Is that, you know, there's like, I just read a study the other day, fascinatingly enough on Facebook, it was on my newsfeed, that, you know, people who like take a lot of selfies, they have higher rates of depression and like dissatisfaction with their life, and with higher rates of like narcissism and stuff like that. I mean, if you see your kids are like starting to do this stuff as a parent, that's, be like, why? What are you doing? This is like, I'm not saying it's going to be an easy conversation. We have to talk to them like at length about the dangers of these kinds of things, because they're going to come back and say, well, all my friends are doing it. Everyone's doing it, right? And so these are the challenging times that we live in. Now, this is a good time to shift. We're going to go to critical conversations, right? This kind of picks up right where we left off. It's the idea of self-worth. Harmful media images and social constructions today. This is a lot of text. I'm going to read it. I'll try to skim through it. Tell our young people, we should say to our young people, don't let other people determine your self-worth or value. Don't give someone that power. You're a valuable person and no one can take that away from you. Never put the locus of your self-esteem outside of yourself. It's in your hands. Only you have the power to make yourself feel better about yourself. If you give someone the power to make you feel good, you're giving them power to make you feel bad also. If they invite you to their house, you're happy, and if they don't, you're sad. Why should they have that kind of power over you? In your zeal to be liked, to be popular, you're looking to them for approval. And while all of us want to be liked, we have to ask ourselves, at what price? What does that mean? Look, I understand the challenges, especially when you're a teenager, of you want to be validated, you want to be accepted, you want people to like you, you don't want to be an outcast, you don't want to be a dork, you don't want to be different. It's in many ways, it's like crushing, right? Unbearable pressure. But if we have conversations with our young people at an earlier age, and the idea of like what your self-worth is, that Allah Ta'ala loves you, Allah Ta'ala has, you know, has given you all of these gifts, has all of these, you know, opportunities that He's given you to like professionally, intellectually, academically contribute to the world. And for us, that's one level. Even beyond that is like the kind of akhlaq, the kind of human being you're going to be and what you're going to do to the world, right? That investing in and having conversations, not when they're 18 and they're dropping them off at college, but when they're 11 or 9 or 7, about like what kind, you know, I read this somewhere the other day. They said, don't ask your kids what they want to be when they grow up. Ask your kids what they, I'm sorry? What they want to contribute, exactly, thank you. You know, that reframes the whole question. It's not what do you want to be? Well, I want to be an artist. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a pharmacist. I understand that's a script, and you fall into that role, versus what do you want to contribute to the world? I'm really sad about, I mean, I literally, you know, read an article in the New York Times this morning about in Bangladesh, right, about the cheap clothes that so many of us wear. Bangladesh is the world's second largest producer of cheap clothing after China. And they went into these villages and these cities, not even villages, cities in Bangladesh that are in just horrific environmental toxic conditions, right? And you at every level, it's like the poor people that need a living wage to feed their families, that are like walking through toxic sewage, making thousands of pairs of shirts that get sold at Macy's and Gap and all this kind of stuff, right? I mean, I'm not blaming them, na'udhu billah. It's the structural inequalities, right, in the system, right, that these big stores buy at cheap cost from these, and there's a trickle-down effect and all of that. Like, I'm not an economist, but, you know, we know enough. So what if a young person said, I am so, you know, a few years ago there was a big fire, right? There was an earthquake and the building collapsed and hundreds of people were injured and killed and the fire broke out and all this stuff. And I mean, what if a young person, like, what would it say if an 18-year-old said, I want to study the way global economies work when it comes to like these inequalities, and I want to imagine a better way. We talk about innovation and incubating thoughts that are going to be, you know, like, you know, all of this kind of stuff. Imagine if a young person said, like, that's not acceptable, right? I mean, one of 1,000 issues that you could think of. I would be like blown away if a young person said that that's what I want to contribute to the world, is how do I at least take one problem, I'm going to tackle it, and I'm going to try to figure out. And you can use any number of, like I said, there's 1,000 things that you could do. Imagine if that's a conversation we were having in our houses. I was talking to one young woman over the break about, like, you know, for example, in South Asians we have the script, oh, you're going to be a doctor. If you can't be a doctor, you'll be an engineer. If you can't be an engineer, oh, maybe you'll go to law school or become like a businessman or something like that. Right? I mean, that's a mentality that we have imported from back home that still applies today. And I bet you it's across a lot of cultures because, and I totally understand anthropologically why. Because the routes of socioeconomic mobility are through education, and education gives you better jobs, gives you social prestige, and you get izzah, you get respect in the eyes of your community. Right, that you're doing a serious job, right? And I get that, I understand the way that works, but to not tell people, right? Because look, we're at places where they're thinking what? Think outside the box. That's what they're telling young people. Be a social entrepreneur, be a technological innovator, do this and do that, and work in, you know, the economy is so different and rapidly shifting, and so, I mean, they're getting that messaging elsewhere, but what if we were to say to them, like, I want you to be the most extraordinary young Muslim that you can be? And that doesn't just mean like you praying a lot and fasting a lot, but it means you developing really your akhlaq and your adab, right? And then like Allah Ta'ala is giving you these opportunities in the world, and then what do you want to do with that? What do you want to contribute to that, right? The idea of friendship. We live in a paradoxical world. Relentless connection leads to a new solitude. This was a book that I was talking about before, Alone Together. Whereas if this is all they're getting connection to is their friends, and while I understand for many people this can be very powerful, right? Because you can connect with people in a way that you couldn't 10 years ago, right? Or a generation ago. But it leads to a new sense of solitude. Because what I would argue is that the way Allah Ta'ala has designed us, right, in our DNA, so to speak, is that human-to-human interaction is what impacts us. And that solitude is like, yeah, I'll have fun following all this out there, but then I also need to be with people, right? That people are going to uplift me, that their state is going to affect my state, right? And that I can talk to someone, I can, you know, have a conversation or a coffee with someone and just experience, you know, that sense of that reality. Emotional dislocation, the illusion of companionship without the demands of intimacy. That's what it does now. We have an idea that we have all these friends and these connections and companions, and without demands of intimacy. Intimacy means what? People you live with. People are people. We have moments, good moments, bad moments. Someone's having a bad day, then you can just like turn it off, like stop following them. But then when you live with someone, you have a roommate, you have a sibling, you have a friend, and they're suffering, they're in crisis, you can't just turn that off and walk away. I mean, that's one form of like, you know, intimacy. The other is that like, you yourself need to connect to someone. You're having a bad day. You need someone to, like, I need someone to like sit down and listen to my problems and woes and whatnot. Friendship is not a necessity. The right friendship is. And messaging that to our young people. Having friends isn't, you don't have to have like X number of friends. What you need is the right kinds of friends. Sorry. Right? The quality over the quantity. A man follows the religion of his friend, so each of you should consider whom he makes his friend, according to the Prophet ﷺ. Find people who reciprocate your joy and love. When you're unhappy, do something joyous with that unhappiness. You know what it feels like to be left out, so make sure no one else feels the same way. And sustaining direct human connection. Like you've seen a thread that I'm talking about here, right? You know, one of the biggest problems, I mean, I think it's been a human problem for a while, but I think maybe it's exacerbated now in the kind of, you know, societies we live in now, especially here in the United States, is that things become very cliquish, right? And if you're not in the right clique because of like your social status or your finances or like where you went to school or whatever, even if you're at the school, right? There's cliques that form there. And this idea is very corrosive, very dangerous of like excluding people and marginalizing people. And we talk about the dangers of it in society, of marginalizing certain ethnic groups or identities or religious groups and whatever, and the effect that it has, like, and you know, we can talk like at length about what it does to like a community psyche and all that. But I'm saying boil it down, what does it do to people? You know, the most emotionally, one of the signs of like emotional intelligence is that like you can read the nonverbals of situations and of people, right? You don't need it, people spelling it out. And like, I've seen people that are such, and I'm not saying this is knowledge, like scholarly knowledge. This is now, they see someone and they know how to just bring that person in. You know, this is why teachers are so invaluable. You know, good teachers are able to make connections with their students. You know, and you know there's like the guy that always talks a lot and the person that's always raising their hand and the one that's really eager to do the project. But the good teacher isn't just like focusing on them. The teacher is like, who's being left out? Who isn't speaking? Who isn't like feeling that they're comfortable or has a space to be able to contribute something? And then it's saying, I want to hear from you. And either you can, it's one way to do it in public or it's another way to go to them privately and be like, I'm just trying, how can I help? What's going on? Like, are you not feeling comfortable for X and Y reason? And just let me hear it, right? And I mean, imagine if we as a community did that, how that would change. And look, these are challenges, but what I'm saying, what I hope I'm saying, is I want, inshallah, for us to raise kids, that our kids are the ones that reach out to the other people and say, hey, why don't you come with us? Why don't you join us? Yeah, after Tarawih, we're going out for ice cream, or like, I don't know, you can use 1,000,001 examples. Right? Because what it's like, you never know like what impact that's going to have on someone. Like that one conversation, that one extension of, I'm being very honest with you. I want that person, I want that to be my son or daughter, inshallah, that sees that person that feels, for whatever reason, marginalized and neglected and left out, and goes up to them quietly, privately, you know, with adab, you know, with a sense of decency and character and akhlaq, and then like pulls that person in. Because that dislocation, that marginalization that happens, this is, like I said out there, this is like the cruelness of the world, right? Where these kids feel so under, you know, they feel neglected, they feel underappreciated, you know, in some cases they feel they just don't belong. You know, that sense of belonging is so powerful. So what would it take if we imagined our communities that we're raising our children to create a sense of belonging for others, right? This is a long one, but the takeaway here is, you know, developing lifelong learners is, you know, all our kids have different, inshallah, have different intellectual passions, right? Some are into science and STEM, some are into literature, some are into like, you know, history and whatnot. And, you know, it's great, like, that's wonderful if they study these subjects because they have a passion for it and they want to like do well in school and whatnot. But to cultivate the deeper level of saying becoming a lifelong learner is that through the course of your life, it's not about degrees, it's not about taking the test, taking the class to take the test to get the degree to go on to X. It's that I actually throughout the course of my life am so passionate about learning things, right? And being, it's not about the grades, it's about the intellectual curiosity. And that's what we need to try to cultivate. And you know, I mean, I'm saying this very like consciously in that here, you know what, you know, perhaps you know what backgrounds your ancestors came from, right? And many of them, even in the world today, like, they don't have the idea of like, I just can sit down and read what I want, right? Because I'm intellectually curious by it or I have a passion. It's like, no, your day has 1,000 demands on your time and energy. Between the physical labor of your job, between the caretaking responsibilities you have, between the this and the that and all of the day-to-day stuff that fills up. And to be able to say at a young age, like, I just want to sit down and read and I have the time and I have access to books and I can go to Amazon Prime and go to the library and get this stuff. Like, you know, in that way, may Allah Ta'ala continue to bless us and make us grateful for the blessings we have. But you know what I tell my community, my students, is that we are the 1%. We are the academic, intellectual 1%. To have the ability to like go to the masjid library, to the public library, to your college library, to go to people's houses that like appreciate books, that have books and like will let you borrow them, and access to all the information that we have like at our fingertips now, right? Is and say that like, you know, I actually have leisure time to sit down and read. You know, this is something like, you know, if nothing else, if we can, you know, like kind of impress that upon our kids, is like, just don't read like the books just because you have to read them for class. Like, I want you to do well, but like also like be say like, I want to read about X, Y, and Z, and you take a trip to the library and you say, you know, I mean, there's so many imaginative things that so many communities are doing now with like book swaps and community public libraries and whatnot. And inshallah, it's just, you know, it's about just having conversations. And like, I'm not saying it's going to change overnight, but it's about like, how do we build the mindset, right? Human education. Children shouldn't run away from adult company and conversation. They should be fascinated to learn from a guest. When you no longer find people interesting, your life becomes diminished and you're touched by less. If you let this happen to your children, they will begin to live their lives vicariously through the fantasy medium of movies, television, video games. They'll lose their connection with people. We need to disconnect people from our cell phones, iPods, and to reconnect with humanity. If you're interested in the world around you, there's no waiting, right? Like, all I can do is I can tell you my own experience. Alhamdulillah, I came of age like when I was a teenager and in college, like long before this came around, and because I was put in situations where I was with people that are older than me, and you talk to them, and you ask them about their life, and you ask them about their ideas, and their opinions, and their experiences, and alhamdulillah, I began to cherish that and really love it, and wanting to talk to people and hear from people. Like, that's what we should be modeling for our kids. As a society, I think that we're like losing that battle, right, as a society. But I'm saying is that I want your kids and my kids to be the kids that are like, when they get in a car, they can actually talk to the uncle or auntie that's driving them, right? You know, or in the masjid, or they're sitting around at iftar with people and they're just like, oh wow, I'm stuck at like the adult table. I'm not sitting next to my friends. Like, oh, you know, I have to put up with this. So let me quickly eat my biryani so that I can go run off and get my phone back, or like go hang out with my friends in the parking lot. Be like, no, wow, assalamu alaikum, like just strike up a conversation and like learn from people in the sense that you begin to appreciate that human contact and appreciate the knowledge and experience and wisdom of, you know, these other people. You know, one of the greatest things that one of the takeaways I'm going to tell you, one of my teachers said this, mashallah. He said, if you look at the masjid of the Prophet, the community of the Prophet ﷺ in Medina Munawwara, he said there's three like really profound takeaways. And I've never heard someone talk about it in this way. He said it was multi-cultural, right? The Prophet ﷺ had people from different cultures, right? I mean, many of them were Qurayshis, or, we talk about the Ansar and the Muhajirin, but the Prophet ﷺ had people in his communities, you know, Bilal radiallahu anhu, many other people from different communities, and the numbers grew over time. So one is exposure, you know, to a multicultural community, not in a homogeneous community, right? That's the beauty that we have, shall we say, like being in diverse Muslim communities in the US. The real profound thing that he said to me was, he said that it was a multi-generational community. There was young people and old people and people everywhere in between. And that was a community. It wasn't just like the young people went off in that room and just stayed there all night, and the old people went over there and drank chai and just like didn't talk to, you know, the young people. Was like, he developed a sense of community where people were engaging, right? And that multi-generational contact point is, think of what it did of like, you know, like the young Sahaba are learning and listening to and experiencing things with the older Sahaba. You know what I mean? And this is something that we need to like, inshallah, like reinvigorate. This idea of family time. These are points, you can read through them. We're about a half hour left. We're almost done, inshallah. I just have a few more slides to get through right here. You know, one thing that I came across, the middle point right there, families must make time for meaningful interactions and experiences. How often do you eat together as a family? Look, I get it. I grew up in a family of doctors. I grew up in a family where long days, on calls, you know, long hours at the office. And like, I get it, in many ways that's like just a plague of American life, right? Where people working overtime and long commutes because of the way we live and all of that. But the idea is to actually schedule time to eat dinner as a family. You know, do you eat together or do you rush through it? Children will stick around if the conversation is interesting. The biggest determinant is the parent. If you see yourself as boring, your children are going to see you as boring. Discuss humanity with them, human strengths and weaknesses. Talk about like what's going on in the world. And I'm not just talking about politics, right? But just talk about like, at your local level, at a community level, like what's going on in their lives and your life. Families who share meals on a regular basis and make an effort to communicate while they are at it have children that perform better in school, exhibit more self-esteem, and feel as they're more in control of their lives. This is family time. right? It's not just structured in like we're going on a family vacation to X place. It's the day-to-day things that you do. You know, one of the things that I'm so grateful for, alhamdulillah, my father would give me a ride to school when I was in junior high, and just that like car ride I had with my father on the way to school. And look, if you're in middle school, like I know you're like stressed. I have a test coming up, I have a quiz, and half the time you don't even want to talk to other people, and whatnot. But like my father, alhamdulillah, may Allah bless him, would make an effort to like just connect, talk about things. Right? And I'm not saying it was always like super successful, right? But like that, if that's the time and the commute that you have, right, that you're able to engage, or like at the end of the day, I mean, I can give you, I don't want people to, like, I don't have all the answers, but I can just give you strategies of things that have worked for me, that I've compared notes with other people that it's worked with. 5 minutes, if you build in a kid's bedtime routine with your young kids at night, like literally, like just this very simple things. I'm not a scholar. I don't have the secrets of what surahs to read at night that are going to not magically, but unlock the spiritual potential of your kids and make them like super righteous children. I mean, I'm looking for that myself, right? But what I can tell you of what works is like you literally have a routine. So they change, they go brush their teeth, they use the restroom, and then you get into bed, and then you just do, what is it? Very simple dhikr. Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. Do the dua, Allahumma bismika amutu wahya. Jazakallah. The question was about breaking for Asr, for Salatul Asr. I think, is it okay if we wait till the end of the talk then? Okay, inshallah, if that's okay with the group, is that okay? Because we'll just push through to the end, and then inshallah we can pray Asr at the end. Jazakallah khair. So what I was going to say is just like that little simple thing. And, I honestly, with who's 14 now, my son Yaqub, I would just like do that when he was little, because I was like, I'm a first-time parent. I'm just going to I'm just going to try this. And then it was working. And then, alhamdulillah, my son remembered it years and years later. Like, it became a routine. And it was a good routine. And that 5-10 minutes you spend with them, like when they're tucking them into bed, kids love routine. That's the thing, is we think that like we're boring them or whatever. Like, yeah, things change when they're teenagers. But I'm saying when they're young, like kids love and thrive on routine. And that's what they say, successful parent. Like, I've heard parents say that, oh, whatever, like my kids don't have a bedtime and my kids can do whatever. No, like the kids need structure in their life, right? And if there's a logic behind it, like we're going to now turn away, we're going to put away the games, we're going to clean up the room, we're going to read a bedtime story, we're going to read small dhikr, read the surahs, falak and nas before bedtime, you're going to brush your teeth. Like, if that's a routine that you do every day, or you do your best you can, because you're maybe not always there at bedtime, but if you build in that routine, like kids, it's a sense of the routine adds a sense of security to it, right? And of normalcy. That kids will get day in and day out, inshallah, that they build into. And obviously from our perspective, you add the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala into it, into all the mundane things of brushing teeth and changing into clothes and putting laundry in the laundry basket and putting away your toys. Like, that is, inshallah, a way that you structure their lives, inshallah, about this. Don't let interruptions ruin family time. It provides togetherness and important time for conversation. Everyone should be acknowledged and part of the conversation, and everyone is listening, whether they want to or not. And this last point, which I read in a book, you can spoil your child, but you cannot love them too much. They might not remember all the things that you gave them, but they will remember the love that you poured into their lives. Your kids are not going to remember all the stuff that you gave them, all the stuff they asked for from, when they were little. But that's just a nature of, I guess, of kids, right? And when you're young, it's the nature of memory. But your kids, inshallah, they'll remember like all of that muhabba, all of that love you put into like that time, whether it's the bedtime routine, or whether it's the breakfast routine, or whether it's the drive to soccer practice, or whether it's the, on the weekends you just went to get coffee and bagels, to bring home to have together on a Sunday morning, or whatever it is. Like, if you build that in and you really, it becomes like an experience with kids, and life gets more complicated the older they get, the older you get, the more things that you have. But I really love that line. You can spoil your child, right? You can give them whenever they want something. It's like, yeah, go ahead, order on Amazon Prime. And I mean, that's possible, and it's very dangerous to do that. But you can't love them too much, right? Life lessons. We're almost at the end now. Prepare your kids to deal with life. Don't coddle them. Instead, teach them life skills. Children need to know that there's a moral context to the universe, that there is a plan and design, that life is not capricious or accidental. There's a governor, a regulator, Allah, who really watches and scrutinizes our actions. He sees and He hears. The greatest destroyer of childhood and its security is purposelessness, the feeling that their existence is not meaningful, that nothing matters. Work, people, possessions, relationships, life itself, nothing matters. The culture teaches them that, and it begins at home. This is the problem. Like I said, this world is so harsh, so cruel. I mean, every day I get down when I look at, like, every day there's a new drama or tragedy in our society, right? You know, racist attacks, you know, gender violence, like, it just goes on and on and on, and it can just wear them down. And our kids are exposed to it, right? Especially if they're in middle school or high school, they're reading about it, they're exposed to it, their teachers are talking about it, you know, to them in school, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, we don't want our kids growing up in a bubble. But the idea that we give it a sense of context and meaning, right? And that's not an easy conversation. I'm not saying it's an easy conversation. We ourselves, many of us, are like challenged to like make sense of this. But you know, we have the adult conversation amongst ourselves, right? And we look to our teachers and our friends and our scholars and thought leaders to, you know, think through and process these things. Then you have a conversation at the appropriate level with your children, right? That what is work, people, possessions, relationship? What do all these things mean? Everything has a role and a place. The dangers are what? Divorce, materialism, the inhumanity that our young people are being exposed to. Now, this is a long list of questions, right? How to be a better role model for your kids. This is based on books that I had read, and I pulled out these kind of quotes. I'll read some of them. And this is the kind of thing, like, I'm happy you should go back and read and reflect on later as well. Do you model a life of passion and purpose, feeling vibrant and alive? Or does your life include things that you constantly complain about and seem to hate? Your kids are going to pick up on that. Do you model taking good care of yourself physically? Or do you eat junk food, smoke, or not exercise? Do you resolve conflicts with other people effectively? Or do you withdraw, avoid confrontations, and get mad? This is what your kids are like learning on how to navigate life from you. Does your family see you handling life's disappointments with positive Islamic strategy? Or do you medicate the problems with addictive behaviors, overeating or drugs or alcohol? Do you model financial responsibility, or do you indulge and live beyond your means? Do you model Islamic morals, akhlaq, by avoiding gossiping, lying, cheating, cursing? Do you model social responsibility by volunteering at the masjid, at the school, or at the hospital? Do you model or properly define self-worth and self-esteem based on character traits? Or do you pursue worth and value through material things, clothes, cars, houses? The way your kids are seeing the way you're living your life. If every time it's like, oh, we made money, let's go to Dubai for vacation, or go here, or go there, or like upgrade our car, or we're constantly shopping for like better furniture or whatever, if that's all your kids are seeing all the time, and I inshallah presume that this community is not like that, inshallah, is that if your kids are seeing that, like, you're teaching them without having to teach them, right, so to speak. Like, that's what they're seeing, is like, my parents, this is how we live, this is what we like, this is what we grow up on, etc., etc. Or are they seeing other values in play? Does your family see you reaching for something more? Have you gotten too comfortable in the non-threatening sameness of your life? Do you model competency in situations? Or does fear slip into your interactions and keep you from doing many things? Do you approach problems and setbacks as opportunities, or label every problem a crisis? Do you model relationships with other people that are loving, affirming, and supportive? Or do you criticize people, tear them down, or talk behind their backs? Do you go through the day with energy, feeling totally alive? Or are you constantly tired and stressed and emotionally flat or depressed, worried or unhappy? Do you spend quality time with your family, including being involved in supporting their activities? Or do you back off because you're too busy? You're not the only role model in their life. But you're the only one with whom you can, the only one whom you can control. So start being the adult you hope your children become. Your active involvement in their lives is the most important learning you can impart. I'm going to just share another piece on that. Is one of the things that I've seen, the nature of my work, of working with young people, smart, dynamic, ambitious, talented young people, is that, you know, there's a flip side to everything, so to speak. Some of these environments are incredibly toxic. spiritually, emotionally, and physically. The amount of anxiety, the amount of stress, the amount of like maladaptive behaviors that some of these places, academic and workplaces, like demand or expect, that's not healthy. And it's very few people that can, I think, come through that unscathed. And so the question is that like, because literally college admissions letters have gone out, right? Like people now, as we speak, every weekend are touring different colleges. If you have a high school age kid that's going to go to college, and every campus, it's like, is this the campus for my kids? Like, what's the ranking in U.S. News and World Report? And you know, what's the faculty to student ratio? And what's that? These are important. I mean, they're questions to ask. I mean, more important questions are like, you know, what's like the kind of community like here, and what's the Muslim community like, and you know, what's the fit of my child? Not like what is News and World Report rankings. That to me is very problematic, right? You know, you have to ask real questions like, what's my financial aid package going to be like, and whatnot. Those are more important questions. But what I mean to say is this. I'm not that age. I'm not at that age with my kids, but I see it, and I've seen it for 10 years with other parents, is in so many ways, do not fall into the trap of like, my kids need to go to a prestigious college to get a fancy degree. I'm not saying that certain degrees and pedigrees are not going to open up doors. What I'm saying is what I would argue is more important is just raise a really good person, a real good mu'min or mu'minah. Someone that has akhlaq, that has a purpose behind what they want to do with their life, that's actually thinking bigger thoughts than like, you know, what they're seeing, like a lot of what their friends or what the media or the society is telling them. Like a well-adjusted, emotionally, spiritually mature, you know, like person. That's what I would say is what you want your teenager and your college-age student to be. Because trust me, I've seen too many. With all the travels, I've seen too many kids that look good on paper. They know how to talk the talk, but they lie. They're very cutthroat. They are manipulative. They will, at the drop of a hat, will cut other people out. They, you know, and all of these things. Like that's not a community, and that's not people. Honestly, that's not the kind of people that I want to like inherit our Muslim communities, because they have different priorities, and they're very kind of messed up priorities. It's very dunyawi, right? And so that's sad. So I mean, I think one of the main lessons that we're going to wrap up in just a few minutes, inshallah, we'll end on time at 5, is, you know, like, I'm going to share a very personal story. We're almost done now, but a very close friend of mine died. He was a young man. He died at the age of 42. He was a beautiful human being, very pious person, very accomplished doctor, Dr. Athar Ali, rahimahullah. He died at Yale. He was a professor at Yale Medical School, and he left behind a beautiful family, and his children are really, really extraordinary. They're very close to my children. I feel very attached to them. And I had to give the khutbah. He died, and I had to give the khutbah the next day, and I spoke at his memorial service. But my point is this, is I was thinking, like, what do you say, right? It's so powerful and impactful at so many levels. But I want to share this with you. I, you know, was going through thinking like what to offer to the community, for my own sake as well, ultimately for the community's sake. This is what I came. You know, there's a very famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. It's well known. The Prophet ﷺ said that when you die, you leave 3 things behind. Everything else stops. The 3 things are: 1 is your sadaqah jariyah, your perpetual charity that you leave behind. This is if you like build a waqf. Right, you like leave behind a water fountain that people drink water from. You build, you know, a soup kitchen or a masjid or something like that that people are benefiting from. That's your sadaqah jariyah, and it can look many different ways. That's number 1. When you go to your qabr, to your grave, that's it. You know from the hadith that like every other avenue is cut off except these 3. Number 2 is if you leave behind beneficial knowledge. Right? The first is what? Your financial legacy. That's what I mean to say. Your second is what? Your intellectual legacy. Your beneficial knowledge. You wrote books. You taught people things. You contributed positive knowledge to the world that is going to, and ideally, inshallah, Islamic knowledge that is going to continue to benefit you. That's your intellectual legacy. And the third is what? The Prophet ﷺ taught us, you leave behind pious offspring, children that pray for you, that are righteous children. That's your spiritual legacy. These are the kids that are going to carry on after you're gone. I mean, that hit me that day like in a different way, where I'm sitting with his children, young kids. You know, this is his spiritual legacy, and mashallah, he was a amazing father. And inshallah, his children grow up to be amazing people with the help of their, wonderful mother, inshallah. And you know people like this in your life as well. So it really hit me. This was just 6 months, it wasn't even 6 months ago, it just happened October, right? And I was like, think about I have to think about my life. I'm at a place, I can say this. At Yale, there's 2 words they're obsessed with. From day one, literally the first day you come to campus, the word that they totally inflate your ego with is leadership. We are going to produce the leaders of the world, of society, of technology, of business, of academia, of on and on and on. How are you going to become a leader? What impact are you going to, make in the world, in tech, in business, in science, and literature and whatnot? And I mean, to an 18-year-old, that pumps your ego up, right? Because you're like, I'm at one of the greatest schools in the entire world. I'm literally, this is an institution that presidents, of countries, come through, and Supreme Court justices, right, and billionaires and things like that. And then the other thing, because we're at graduation is a couple weeks from now, the other word that they're obsessed with is legacy. What's your legacy going to be? You say that to a 22-year-old? I mean, that's it's a lot of pressure to put on a 22-year-old. But the other thing is, what kind of legacy are you talking about? Because for us, we have a different concept of legacy, right? Of what you bequeath to the world, what you leave behind. And for us, it's like, yes, you can write books and build great buildings, and if you're a doctor, you're healing the world, inshallah. There's many kinds of things that you leave behind. But at some level, on this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and the topic of today, on parenting with love and logic, is the legacy is the children that you leave behind. Are these children that are are they gonna remember you and make dua for you? And how are they gonna carry on the kind of life that you taught them and that you lived? And may Allah give us the tawfiq to leave behind the best children, amongst the mu'mineen and mu'minat, salihin wa salihat. Ameen, inshallah. Last slides now. A lot of this I've already been talking about. I've been weaving it throughout. So, purpose and meaning. By teaching children about Allah, we're telling them that life is neither purposeless nor meaningless, that each and every one of us has a part of a divine plan. They need to know that life is not capricious, not accidental, but is purposeful and meaningful. Great people are those who do the right thing because it is the right thing to do, even when no one is looking, right? This is a core teaching of our deen. This is the idea of taqwa, right? Of ihsan. You don't do it for the reward from people. You do it because it is right and not for the ulterior motive. Allah always notices no matter what. When the child knows that Allah is always watching, it lends significance to every action. It all matters. And then you read on. Perfection lies in the struggle to do the right thing amidst the predilection to do otherwise. The one who struggles is the real hero. We're not asking our children to be perfect. We're asking them to struggle to become better and to realize their full potential. The frightening question will be faced with on the Day of Judgment. Why were you not as great as you could have been? Right? When Allah Ta'ala says, or could say to us, I gave you this, I put you in this community, I gave you this job, or give your parents this job, and I gave you access to these things, right? And for us to think back, what more could I have done as a parent, as a community member, as a spouse and whatnot? Obviously, the ultimate question is why didn't I fulfill my potential to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as His abd, as His servant? But this is tied into that, right? If Allah ta'ala gave you, He gave you intelligence, He gave you opportunities, He gave you faculties, He gave you facilities, He gave you all of these things. And that's what I mean is that when I say to my communities that we're the 1%. How many billions of Muslims are out there, right? You look at the breadth of the Muslim world. They don't have access to the resources that we have, intellectual resources, material resources, safety and security that we... So this Allah Ta'ala can ask us these things, right? Now, last slide. The 4 qualities to teach children, key qualities. Tahara, purity of mind, body, and heart. Right? I mean, we teach tahara is purity of the body, right? How do you do wudu? That's great, mashallah, you have to teach that. In fact, the sooner you teach children the tahara of the body, about literally the facts of life in terms of how to use the washroom, how to wash their hands properly, how to make wudu, how to brush their teeth, because all of this is part of fitrah. It's all part of the way Allah designed the human body to be clean and presentable, because this is from our beloved Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then tahara of the mind, right? To how to keep their mind pure and not full of nonsense and garbage. And then finally the heart. how to get rid of the jealousy and anger and envy and all of these other things that, you know, the world infects into your heart. Then ikhbat, worshiping Allah with utmost humility. Teach them the Quran, the love for salah, taqwa and zuhud. Teach them that they weren't created to be attached to this world. We have to teach our kids that. If all they see is they grow up in a nice masjid and the uncles drive Mercedes and they come to Jummah and they come to iftar and everyone's eating like delicious catered biryani every week, you know, for Ramadan, like that's great. Hey, I mean, who doesn't want that? The nafs wants that. I'm not denying that. But like, that's not the purpose of your life. The purpose of your life is that love worshiping Allah, love aspiring for taqwa, of zuhud, of the simple life, right? Our scholars, they quote the Sahaba who said that, you know, zuhud isn't like dressing like a fakir, like dressing like a poor person, because a poor person can have love of dunya in his heart, right? Like if you have torn up clothes and you have a broken down car, that's not zuhud. Zuhud is that you have dunya in your hand and not in your heart, right? You have the dunya in your hand, but it's not in your heart. And trust me, that's easier said than done, right? To not have dunya in your heart. Where people are like, yeah, I'm waiting for the next big iPhone upgrade. My dad's going to get it for me. No, that's not how we look at this. That's not how we, I'm waiting for our next family vacation. We're going to go to like, Hawaii. Like, okay, if you want to go to vacation in Hawaii, that's fine, but that's not what you should be looking forward to. Life has more than just you going in water parks and like taking selfies and whatever it is, right? That we weren't created to be attached to this world. Finally, samaha, personality which comprises bravery, generosity, patience, empathy, and controlling of desires. Life isn't meant to be just about comfort. It requires struggle and striving. You know, there's such a powerful quote from Sayyidina Omer radiallahu anhu, who has so many powerful quotes. Sayyidina Omer Farooq radiallahu anhu said, don't get used to luxury. It never lasts. So don't get used to luxury. Don't get your body accustomed, or your mind or your heart. And teach your children not to get used to the comfortable life. Allah Ta'ala is in control of our fortunes. You know? Allah Ta'ala can give it and Allah can take it away in His infinite wisdom and mercy. Right? And so this is look at Sayyidina Omar's, don't get used to the comforts of life. Like we need to teach our kids that, I mean, at so many levels, right? Of, life isn't meant to be just about being comfortable. It's about struggle and striving, right? This is the thing that I said before, the sister corrected me on that, is like, what do you want to contribute to the world? Like, we talk about our kids, we want to show them, we want to have experiences for our kids. That's great, give them experiences. But experiences don't have to be going to like Disneyland all the time or going to Dubai or whatever it is. Like, give your kids experiences to take them, show them the rest of the world, right? Like what in that way, at a young age, that'll leave an impression. An impression of like, A, I have so many blessings from Allah that I have to be mindful of these blessings. B, part of what me, of using the potential that Allah gave me is that how do I contribute in a real way, right? Okay, you want to be a scientist, you want to be an engineer, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a pharmacist, you want to be a teacher, whatever it is. How do I use that ability that Allah gave me to actually improve the lives of other people around us? Not just so that I can become a specialist in this field and, make 6-7 figures and then like just chill the rest of my life, right? And then you go to my friend's house every Friday night and drink chai and just talk about whatever. And the last is adala. Be just to them and teach them to be just to others, right? We live in a world where like the world is agitating in such powerful ways for social justice. Economic, political, environmental, just gender justice. It's like all of the patriarchy and misogyny and racism and xenophobia and that's out there. And like, literally the world is at this moment right now that we're seeing it, our kids are seeing it, right? And that, to teach children we have to be just to them, to be fair to them, and then teach them to always be striving for justice of others, right? And the ayat is just as well as I do in the Quran, where Allah Ta'ala calls us to justice, even if it's amongst our own people, right? Because Allah Ta'ala loves adala, Allah Ta'ala loves justice. And to teach kids is that like with the consciousness of that at a young age. Now, I left a couple minutes left, inshallah, we can break on time for Asr. I just want to run through really quickly with this recommended readings. I will leave this up here after the prayer. I'll be still stick around, inshallah, if anyone has any questions. I'm happy to talk, inshallah. But we can have the benefit of praying in Jama'at together as well. Really quickly, some of the best books that I've come across from an Islamic perspective on parenting are these 3 books right here, written by the same authors. The first is, this one's very famous, called War Within Our Hearts, by brothers Habib Qadri and Sheikh Saad Qadri, who are 2 brothers in Chicago. They're extraordinary people, mashallah. They're teachers, they're educators, they're community activists, mashallah. They're born and raised in Chicago. They know the community very well. They wrote this book many years ago called War Within Our Hearts, and it's about all of the issues that our young people go through, right, that teenagers are struggling with. You can order all these online. The second one is called Parenting. Who Said It Was Going to Be Easy? This is really about the issues that I talked about. A lot of what I'm pulling from here, the ideas come from there. And this one, which is really short, but it's called Wisdom from the Wise, the advice of Luqman alayhi salam. Right, Luqman al-Hakim alayhi salam was a great wali of Allah, and he had in Surah 33, Surah Luqman, Allah Ta'ala gives us these beautiful dialogues between Sayyidina Luqman alayhi salam and his son, and there's so many gems of wisdom that you can pull from that on how to teach people to be people of purpose, people of broad vision, people of taqwa, people of ihsan, people of closeness to Allah. So it's a short book, but it's full, and all it is actually just the ayat of Surah Luqman with like a commentary written on it for parenting. Right, for like practical advice, and that you can get away from there. Obviously, you see some of the other books I have here. This is a wonderful book for new Muslims, for young Muslims to read, it's a refresher for older Muslims. Being Muslim, a practical guide by Dr. Ustadh Tarsin. I love history, and there's there's many books out there, but I think that we live in a world like, look, why do people? This is the power. I was an English major. This is the power of narrative. Every society has its stories, has its epics of the past, and it has those stories are retold, throughout its culture. It's the power of literature, the power of storytelling. Why is Hollywood so powerful, right? Like Netflix and all of these things, because people want stories, and stories have characters and meaning and plot and all of this behind it. In many ways, we need to revive. Our old history is full of these stories of the companions, of the righteous men and women of the past, of the Sahaba and the Sahabiyat. And that's something that, we need to tell our children these stories to keep them alive in their hearts. These are 2 books that I have here. I'll leave them up here. MashaAllah, there's so many, one can comment on. And now, MashaAllah, there's so many wonderful lecture series that scholars have done. Sheikh Abdul Nasser Jangda has a wonderful English Seerah series that he does at Qalam. Ustadh Abdul Rahman Murphy. There's literally, once you start, there's such a wide list, right, of scholars and English-speaking scholars that can speak to both men and women that can speak to our children on these issues. I was a literature major, and I think some really powerful literature to share. The Butterfly Mosque by Willow Wilson is a really beautiful memoir story of how to share about her own experience being a young woman in a Muslim country and coming to, finding Islam and living in a Muslim society. There's this book by Yasmin Mujahid called Reclaim Your Heart that's really probing the depths of, we live in a world where people are craving authentic emotional experiences and navigating and making sense of this, but we're full of like these cheap experiences, right, through Hollywood and television messages. And this book is really about like emotional depth, mashallah. Reclaim Your Heart. I have a lot of books in here. I can't go through all of them right now. Haroon Mogul wrote a book, How to Be a Muslim, An American Story. This is an older. I wouldn't recommend it for younger audiences because they're not going to necessarily understand it, but I would say for like college students, older young adults, people like that, this is really interesting. It's very honest, very raw book. It's very powerful in terms of how to, being an American Muslim. And then the last thing I want to leave with, and then we're going to end on time, inshallah, is, so these are some of the ones I mentioned right there. There's one book I just forgot, but I'll tell you right there. There's a book I just heard about. I haven't read it yet. I got it from my kids called An Acquaintance by Sabah Sayed. It's her first book. It's a young adult novel. It's appropriate for teenagers and high school kids. It's supposed to be really well reviewed, really great work. It just came out a couple months ago, so I bought it. I haven't read it yet. Rhonda Abdel Fattah wrote a book called Does My Head Look Big in This? It's about a young woman's navigating issues of wearing hijab and being a young adult in the society. She's written several books. This is one of her most famous books. books. It's one of her first books, in fact. There's a great book I heard called Amina's Voice by Hina Khan. Hina Khan is a wonderful illustrator, but she's done like graphic novels and not graphic novels, but illustrated books. There's a new book that just came out called Ramadan by Hannah Elliott that is very appropriate for young kids. If you have like a toddler, like a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, like young kids, that really talks about Ramadan. Then Layla's Lunchbox and Under the Ramadan Moon. I've heard great reviews about that. I myself am going to explore these books, inshallah. But I try to give it a different range, right? For young kids, for primary school kids, for high school kids, and then for college age and beyond. So Jazakumullah khair. You've been a wonderful, wonderful audience, very attentive, very engaging. MashaAllah, may Allah reward you. May Allah Ta'ala forgive me for anything wrong that I said, any mistakes that I made, anything that I said that was a benefit, inshallah, is from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And please make dua for me and my family and my teachers. I'll make dua for all of you as well, inshallah, for the people at BIS, the leadership team, the staff, for the people at this masjid, this wonderful community. They've been very good to me. They've invited me many, many times. And, you know, we're all in this together. That's the last thing I'm going to say. You know, my kids, your soon-to-be kids, inshallah. You know, may Allah bless them. May Allah protect them. You know, I want my kids to look to you as their uncles and aunties, and I want your kids to look to me as someone that they can, you know, connect with, inshallah, in our community, because we're all in this together, irrespective of your race, cultural background, nationality. Like, that's really when we talk about, you know, the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ as being one united family. We've got to model this. You know, I need to look out for your kids. I want them emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, physically to succeed and be healthy and be strong and successful. And I would hope that you want that for my kids as well, inshallah, because they're the ones that we leave behind that are going to inherit this deen from us, you know, inshallah, in these lands. Ameen, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.